Hello. Miss B. Hanley here, and today I'm going to be doing a summer reading book. We're going to be reading Scythe by Neal Shusterman. He's a part of, let me turn down this music, actually. Let me turn this down just a wee bit. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and restart my intro. Hi, everyone. Miss B. Hanley here, and today we are doing a summer reading stream with one of the books from our summer reading list. This is Scythe by Neal Shusterman. And I have read this book already in full, completely, and I totally love it. I love this book so much. I'm so excited to be sharing it with you. We're going to be discussing some parts of the novel. We're going to be looking at the author himself. Tonight, I figured we would do a little pre-reading, learn about the book, learn about the author. There's a couple of videos. There's like a book trailer, if you can believe it. And then we'll try to get through part one tonight. I don't think we're going to get through the whole book tonight. That's definitely for sure. But hopefully we can get through the first part of the book pretty quickly tonight. It's only about, I think, 60 pages is the first part. So I am very excited to share it with you. It's so good and it gets so intense and there's so many great things in this book to talk about. So I'm really excited to jump into it. Okay. First, let's read the back of the book, right? Because let's pretend we're at a bookstore and we're just going to pick it up off the shelf and read the back of the book, see if this is a book that we want to read. Okay, Arc of a Scythe, book 1. So there is a series. I think it's a trilogy. There are 3 books. I haven't read the other 2 yet, but I'm getting them. Like almost all of Neal Shusterman's books are just going up my shelf here pretty soon. Okay, so the back of the book starts with, "Thou shalt kill. A world with no hunger, no disease, no war, no misery. Humanity has conquered all those things and has even conquered death. Now scythes are the only one who can end life, and they are commanded to do so in order to keep the size of the population under control. Citra and Rowan are chosen to apprentice to a scythe, a role that neither wants. These teens must master the art of taking life, knowing that the consequence of failure could mean losing their own. They learn living in a perfect world comes only with a heavy price." It's a Prince Honor book, which I guess is a special award. Scythe is the debut of a thrilling new series of the National Book Award winning author Neal Shusterman. Okay, so this book is it's really intense. It talks about some really intense themes. Obviously, death is a big part of it. So be prepared, obviously, when you're going into it. It's talking about killing. It's talking about death. It's talking about people, like actually their job is to go out and kill people. Pretty crazy, but it's legit. It's a really awesome book. It's got so much heart, so many things, and the characters, it being set in a dystopia is really interesting. I mean, it's obviously set in the future where we've advanced to the point where we have no problems, like war and hunger and disease and even death is like such a minuscule thing, right? Like we don't even worry about it. But the fact that Citra and Rowan are so relatable, I think is what makes this book so interesting, because the teens themselves are in this kind of society where death isn't really thought of as a problem unless you come up against a scythe. But they have a very interesting perspective on death and what it means and the importance of it and the significance of it. So it's really interesting book. We're going to get into it. But first, I want us to take a look at, where am I? I want us to take a look at the website. Okay, can we do this? Okay, yeah, so here's the website. I have to open this up. Give me a second. Okay, yeah, so we've got, this is the Neal Shusterman's website. I went obviously to the author's website immediately. He's the expert on the book, so we might as well take it from the author. Okay, so we have, oh no, I can't scroll down on this page. It basically gives you the same information that you got from the back of the book, but there's also some videos I wanted to look at with you. Unfortunately, for some reason, I'm not allowed to scroll down on this website, which is unfortunate. So we'll just take that out. Sorry, guys. Give me a second. Technical difficulties on my first stream on YouTube. Okay, can I do this then? Okay, let's watch the trailer. Let's just start with the trailer then, since that's really basically the first thing on the website about the book. And then the next thing I want to show you is another video, another BookTube video where a bunch of different book reviewers on BookTube talk about the book and give their review of it. I think most of it's positive. Honestly, I think it's a little biased. It's coming from the author, so that kind of makes sense, but I'm also biased. I said it was a good book. I like this book. So, okay. I hope you guys will be able to hear this. This is the book trailer. It's only a minute long. And obviously, I'm not going to preface it. This is the book trailer created by the publisher. So, enjoy.
If we are to protect our perfect world, we Scythes must live by a supreme set of rules. Thou shalt kill. Thou shalt take life without bias or malice. But for those who resist, swiftly end their bloodline. The methods you use will define you.
Okay, that's it. So I think...
What kind of Scythe will you choose to be?
Yeah, so this book came out in 2016, and I'd say the trailer is pretty accurate to the book, except for like the fact I don't remember there being a part where he bites an apple and it's like bloody coming out, you know? I don't feel like that was part, but the other stuff, like the kissing of the ring, that's totally in the book. It's very accurate to the book. It's obviously been made by the publisher. The only thing I would say is that I feel like I'm going to have to pay attention to the characters' descriptions a little bit more, because I can't really recall if they described themselves in the book, or if they were described in the book, like what they looked like, and how that kind of matched up with the two actors that were in that trailer. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I've learned a valuable lesson about streaming just now, especially when it comes to these little windows I'm putting into my stream software. So I'm going to remember never to do that again, because they just did not end up working out. And now I've got an ad. I had an ad on my screen. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, we're just going to skip that whole part. I'll block it out somehow. I don't know. Okay, we're going to go ahead. I think that was really it. I guess I could show you some more things if I can actually get some stuff to open. Let's do this. I'm not afraid. No, cancel. We want to do window capture. Okay, perfect. Bring that down here. Perfect. Okay, this is better. Right? This is better, because then I can just take a look at the website. You guys can see it easily. Okay, so here's the first book. This is the book that we are going to read on stream. I don't think I am going to read the other books on stream. I haven't read them yet, even if I get to them. But they are Thunderhead, which is the second one. It references something, an important character in the book. And then the third book is The Toll, which I have no idea what that could be about, but I'm very excited to read the rest of the series. Okay, they do have this other video of booktubers. That's right. I did want to talk about this video, or at least watch it. I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't watched it. But this is from the publisher as well, so it's not going to be, it's going to be biased, I'm pretty sure.
Is Scythe by Neal Shusterman.
Scythe by Neal Shusterman.
Scythe by Neal Shusterman! Oh my god, no!
I loved it.
Yeah. All positive.
So it's a totally different
It is a good book.
dystopian genre. It's basically a utopia.
Scythe takes place in a future Earth where no one ever dies.
No one ever dies?
The human race has found immortality, and so the population of humans on Earth has grown exponentially.
And a scythe is sort of like a Grim Reaper in which they actually take people's lives. So then the population won't get out of hand.
In this book, you follow two characters that both get chosen to become Scythe apprentices.
And it's their competition to see who can be the scythe, because it can only be one of them.
If you think about the idea of scythes, is that they're forced to be killers.
Oh my god, this sounds horrifying.
You just cannot help but like the main
I like her.
character of this series.
'Cause that's exactly how I feel.
Thrilling, suspenseful.
Loved it so much. I'm
Yeah.
so excited for the series to continue.
And I think it was fabulous. It was really well done.
So I was very happy with this.
A lot of people like this book.
Definitely recommend it.
I
Hugely
read this.
big hit. I don't
Okay.
think I've
Next
seen
one.
any bad reviews of Scythe. I don't think I've seen any bad reviews of Scythe. So I think this is going to be a really good book if you have chosen to pick it up for the summer reading project, or if you just haven't picked it up from watching one of my videos. I think we're really going to enjoy. I think we're really going to enjoy this. It's a really great book. It's going to be intense, lots of stuff to dig into, thematic wise, and obviously it's going to be tough concepts to be talking about, because it's talking about death, which is, you know, it's a tough concept to think about and to talk about. Okay, so I'm going to put the synopsis up on the screen, so that way if anybody comes in and wants to know what's going on, they can read that. And then also, I don't want to read, he put the acknowledgments at the beginning. That's interesting. The acknowledgments usually go at the end. Maybe I should I read the acknowledgments? It's only a page long. It's just thanking a bunch of people. I don't know if I don't think it's worth it to read it. He thanks his publisher and a bunch of his family members. If you're interested in reading it, you can certainly probably find a preview of it on the internet. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Let me get my reading voice on. Take a nice glass of water here. Give me a second. Oh, I do have dystopian music queued up as well. So maybe I put on some dystopian music. That's not what I meant to hit. Let's see. This is an hour of dystopian music.
Lucidchart makes intelligent
That's an
diagrams
ad.
and helps your best ideas become real.
Oh yeah, this is good. This is really good. I like this. This is nice dystopian music. Oh yeah, this is good. Okay, this is perfect. Welcome to Scythe by Neal Shusterman. Part 1, Robe and Ring. So this page is formatted a little bit differently than the other pages. I just want to show you. It does indicate something different is happening in the book. It's like a diary entry, and we'll kind of learn about those as we go. So I'm just going to kind of not spoil it for you. Okay. We must by law keep a record of the innocents we kill. And as I see it, they're all innocents, even the guilty. Everyone is guilty of something, and everyone still harbors a memory of childhood innocence, no matter how many layers of life wrapped around it. Humanity is innocent. Humanity is guilty. And both states are undeniably true. We must, by law, keep a record. It begins on day 1 of apprenticeship, but we do not officially call it killing. It's not socially or morally correct to call it such. It is, and has always been, gleaning. Named for the way the poor would trail behind farmers in ancient times, taking the stray stalks of grain left behind. It was the earliest form of charity. A scythe's work is the same. Every child is told from the day he or she is old enough to understand that the scythes provide a crucial service for society. Ours is the closest thing to a sacred mission the modern world knows. Perhaps this is why we must, by law, keep a record, a public journal, testifying to those who will never die and those who are yet to be born, as to why we human beings do the things we do. we are instructed to write down not just our deeds, but our feelings, because it must be known that we do have feelings: remorse, regret, sorrow too great to bear. Because if we didn't feel those things, what monsters would we be? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 1. No Dimming of the Sun. The Scythe arrived late on a cold November afternoon. Citra was at the dining room table, slaving over a particularly difficult algebra problem, shuffling variables, unable to solve for x or y, when this new and far more pernicious variable entered her life's equation. Guests were frequent at the Terranova's apartment, so when the doorbell rang, there was no sense of foreboding, no dimming of the sun, no foreshadowing of the arrival of death at their door. Perhaps the universe should have deigned to provide such warnings, but Scythes were no more supernatural than tax collectors in the grand scheme of things. They showed up, did their unpleasant business, and were gone. Her mother answered the door. Citra didn't see the visitor as he was at first, hidden from her view by the door when it opened. What she saw was how her mother stood there, suddenly immobile, as if her veins had solidified within her, as if where she tipped over, she would fall to the floor and shatter. "May I enter, Mrs. Terranova?" The visitor's tone of voice gave him away, resonant and inevitable, like the dull toll of an iron bell, confident in the ability of its appeal to reach all those who needed reaching. Citra knew before she even saw him that it was a Scythe. My God, a Scythe has come to our home. Yes, of course, come in. Citra's mother stepped aside to allow him entry, as if she were the visitor and not the other way around. I just want to pause for a minute because the talk about the tolling of the bells, that is the third book in the series, is The Toll. And there's a literary reference here to the tolling of the bells. It's, I think, oh my goodness, my English major self is going to be messed up here. Okay, let's turn down the dystopian music for just a second. I'm pretty sure bell tolls. It's a novice. It's a Ernest Hemingway novel called The Bell Tolls, For Whom the Bell Tolls. And it's basically, the answer is the bell tolls for thee, which is a reference to death, which is, the tolling of the bells is supposed to mean that you are maybe going to die or that death is near. It's kind of like that same kind of vibe. Music is working for me, though. I'm very excited about this. Okay. I was on page 6. He stepped over the threshold, his soft, slipper-like shoes making no sound on the parquet floor. His multi-layered robe was smooth, ivory linen, and although it reached so low as to dust the floor, there was not a spot of dirt on it anywhere. A Scythe, Citra knew, could choose the color of his or her robe, every color except for black, for it was considered inappropriate for their job. Black was the absence of light, and Scythes were the opposite, luminous and enlightened. They were acknowledged as the very best of humanity, which is why they were chosen for the job. Oops. Oh, sorry. Okay. Some Scythe robes were bright, some were muted. They looked like the rich, flowing robes of Renaissance angels, both heavy yet lighter than air. The unique style of Scythe's robes, regardless of the fabric and color, made them easy to spot in public, which made them easy to avoid, if avoidance was what a person wanted. Just as many were drawn to them. Okay, so here, Citra, I guess we are looking at this from Citra's point of view, right? It is third person, but Citra is kind of the main focus of who the reader is viewing or observing all of this through. So third person limited. And she's talking about his robes, and she calls them ivory, which is white, basically. So it's interesting that this Scythe has white robes, because we're going to see later on, like, it's almost the opposite of black, which obviously is not an appropriate color for Scythes to wear. Kind of, makes the whole thing seem more supernatural, I guess, or more dark. But yeah, their robes are kind of like their marker of who they are. And it's their only way of like, I guess, showing any kind of, you know, customization or like their independence or their individuality, I mean, because they are kind of different from society. Okay. The color of the robe often said a lot about the Scythe's personality. This Scythe's ivory robe was pleasant and far enough from true white not to assault the eye with its brightness. But none of this changed the fact of who and what he was. He pulled off his hood to reveal neatly cut gray hair, a mournful face red-cheeked from the chilly day, and dark eyes that seemed themselves almost to be a weapon. Citra stood, not out of respect, but out of fear, shock. She tried not to hyperventilate. She tried not to let her knees buckle beneath her. They were betraying her by wobbling, so she forced fortitude to her legs, tightening her muscles. Whatever the Scythe's purpose there, he would not see her crumble. "You may close the door," he said to Citra's mother, who did so, although Citra could see how difficult it was for her. A Scythe in the foyer could still turn around if the door was open. The moment that the door was closed, he was truly inside one's home. He looked around, spotting Citra immediately. He offered a smile. "Hello, Citra," he said. The fact that he knew her name froze her just as solidly as his appearance had frozen her mother. "Don't be rude," her mother said too quickly. "Say hello to our guest." "Good day, Your Honor." "Hi," said her younger brother Ben, who had just come to his bedroom door, having heard the deep peal of the Scythe's voice. Ben was barely able to speak out of the one-word greeting. He looked to Citra and to their mother, thinking the same thing they were all thinking. Who has he come for? Will it be me? Or will I be left to suffer the loss? Oh my God. Is that in the music? That kind of scared me because I thought I saw movement. Oh my gosh, this music is kind of scaring me. Okay. But it is really working for this book, so I'm going to keep it on. Can you guys hear it okay? Yeah, it's good. Okay. It is really dark though. Oof. I'm getting scared and I've already read this book. Okay. "I smelled something inviting in the hallway," the Scythe said, breathing in the aroma. "Now I see I was right in thinking it came from this apartment." "Just baked ziti, Your Honor, nothing special." Until this moment, Citra had never known her mother to be so timid. "That's good," said the Scythe, "because I require nothing special." Then he sat on the sofa and waited patiently for dinner. Was it too much to believe that the man was here for a meal and nothing more? After all, Scythes had to eat somewhere. Customarily, restaurants never charged them for food, but that didn't mean a home-cooked meal was not more desirable. There were rumors of Scythes who required their victims to prepare them a meal before he gleaned. Is this what was happening here? Whatever his intentions, he kept them to himself, and they had no choice but to give him whatever he wanted. Will he spare a life here today if the food is to his taste, Citra wondered. No surprise that people bent over backward to please Scythes in every possible way. Hope in the shadow of fear is the world's most powerful motivator. Citra's mother brought him something to drink at his request and now labored to make sure tonight's dinner was the finest she had ever served. Cooking was not her specialty. Usually, she would return home from work just in time to throw something quick together for them. Tonight, their lives might just rest on her questionable culinary skills. And their father? Would he be at home in time, or would a gleaning in his family take place in his absence? As terrified as Citra was, she did not want to leave the Scythe alone with his thoughts, so she went into the living room with him. Ben, who was clearly as fascinated as he was fearful, sat with her. The man finally introduced himself as Honorable Scythe Faraday. "I, did a report on Faraday for school once," Ben said, his voice cracking only once. "You picked a pretty cool scientist to name yourself after." Scythe Faraday smiled. "I like to think I chose an appropriate patron histonic. Like many scientists, Michael Faraday was an underappreciated in his life, yet our world would not be what it is without him." "I think I have you in my Scythe card collection," Ben went on. "Okay, Google, cancel timer." Okay. I'm just going to pause for a second. I have laundry I have to move over. So I'm going to... What am I going to put you in? No, I don't want you to put you here. I guess I'll just put you here. I'll just leave it here. I'm gonna be right back. Laundry's done. Spooky music is still running. Perfect. Love the spooky music. Dystopian. Okay, continuing on. By the way, we just left off where, I don't know if you need to know this, but we left off where Scythe Faraday is talking with Citra and her brother in the living room. I think I have you in my Scythe card collection, Ben went on. I have almost all the mid-American Scythes. But you were younger in the picture. The man seemed perhaps 60, and although his hair had gone gray, his goatee was still salt and pepper. It was rare for a person to let themselves reach such an age before resetting back to a more youthful self. Citra wondered how truly old he was. How long had he been charged with ending lives? Do you look your true age, or are you at the far end of time by choice? Citra asked. Citra! Her mother nearly dropped the casserole she had taken out of the oven. What a question to ask! I like direct questions, the Scythe said. They show an honesty of spirit, so I will give an honest answer. I admit to having turned the corner 4 times. My natural age is somewhere near 180, although I forget the exact number. Of late, I have chosen this venerable appearance because I find that those I glean take more comfort from it. Then he laughed. They think me wise. Is that why you're here, Ben blurted, to glean one of us? Scythe Faraday offered an unreadable smile. I am here for dinner. This is interesting because the concept of like the fact that you can never die, right? So to get around the fact that when you get older, you age. Obviously, our bodies deteriorate over time. Our skin gets looser and get wrinkles and our eyes go bad and our hearing goes bad and all that bad stuff, or all that, kind of bad stuff. But to get around that in this world, this dystopia, utopia, whatever you want to call it, they can reset themselves back to like a normal age or like an age that's younger, right? So once they reach a certain age, they can go and to like a place like a hospital or a medical facility where they can basically turn themselves back to being 20 or 30 or whatever age, or I think they talk about it later, but whatever age they want, and can continue to live on for longer periods of time. Even though they might be like 180, like Scythe Faraday says, they might look like they're only 50. Okay, I'm just going to fix my door real quick. Okay. That was a break in the text, by the way, so I didn't just stop in the middle of the story. It was kind of like a passage of time there. Citra's father arrived just as dinner was about to be served. Her mom had apparently informed him of the situation, so he was much more emotionally prepared than the rest of them had been. As soon as he entered, he went straight over to Scythe Faraday to shake his hand and pretended to be far more jovial and inviting than he truly must have been. The meal was awkward, mostly silence punctuated by the occasional comment by the Scythe. "You have a lovely home. What a flavorful lemonade. This may be the best baked ziti in all of mid-America." Even though everything he said was complimentary, his voice registered like a seismic shock down everyone's spine. "I haven't seen you in the neighborhood," Citra's father finally said. "I don't suppose you would have," he answered. "I'm not the public figure that some other Scythes choose to be. Some Scythes prefer the spotlight, but to truly do the job right, it requires a level of anonymity." "Right?" Citra bristled at the very idea. "There's a right way to glean?" "Well," he answered, "there are certainly wrong ways," and said nothing more about it. He just ate his ziti. As the meal neared a close, he said, "Tell me about yourselves." It wasn't a question or a request. It could only be read as a demand. Citra wasn't sure whether this part of his little dance of death or if he was genuinely interested. He knew their names before he entered the apartment, so he probably already knew all the things they could tell him. Then why ask? "I work in historical research," her father said. "I'm a food synthesis engineer," said her mother. The Scythe raised his eyebrows. "And yet you cooked this from scratch." She put down her fork. "All from synthesized ingredients." "Yes, but if we can synthesize anything," he offered, "why do we still need food synthesis engineers?" Citra could practically see the blood drain from her mother's face. So, if you think about it, the Scythe basically just said, we can basically make any food with a 3D printer. Why do we need people to cook food? And it's kind of being read as why do you need to be in the world? So it's kind of like saying, you could be gleaned, you could be killed by the Scythe right now because you don't really need to be in the world. I don't think anybody in the world currently in this book has a purpose. They just do a job that they like they do work, but it's not like to make money. It's not like to, I don't know, bring food at the table or anything or progress society because everything's taken care of for them. So it's kind of a tense moment right here. That's why her mother's blood drained from her face. It was her father who rose to defend his wife's existence. "There's always room for improvement." "Yeah, and Dad's work is important too," Ben said. "What, historical research?" The Scythe waved his fork, dismissing the notion. "The past never changes, and from what I can see, neither does the future." While her parents and brother were perplexed and troubled by his comments, Citra understood the point he was making. The growth of civilization was complete. Everyone knew it. When it came to the human race, there was no more left to learn. Nothing about our existence to decipher, which meant that no one person was more important than any other. In fact, in the grand scheme of things, everyone was equally useless. That's what he was saying. And it infuriated Citra, because on a certain level, she knew he was right. Citra was well known for her temper. It often arrived before reason and left only after the damage was done. Tonight would be no exception. "Why are you doing this? If you're here to glean one of us, just get it over with and stop torturing us." Her mother gasped, and her father pushed back his chair as if ready to get up and physically remove her from the room. "Citra, what are you doing?" Now her mother's voice was quivering. "Show respect." "No, he's here. He's going to do it, so let him do it. It's not like he hasn't decided. I've heard that Scythes always make up their mind before they enter a home. Isn't that right?" The Scythe was unperturbed by her outburst. "Some do, some don't," he said gently. We each have our own way of doing things." By now, Ben was crying. Dad put his arm around him, but the boy was inconsolable. "Yes, Scythes must glean," Faraday said, "but we also must eat and sleep and have simple conversation." Citra grabbed his empty plate away from him. "Well, the meal's done, so you can leave." Then her father approached him. He fell to his knees. Her father was actually on his knees to this man. "Please, Your Honor, forgive her. I take full responsibility for her behavior." The Scythe stood. An apology isn't necessary. It's refreshing to be challenged. You have no idea how tedious it gets. The pandering, the obsequious flattery, the endless parade of sycophants, a slap in the face is bracing. It reminds me that I'm human. Okay, so there's a lot of A lot of big vocab words in there in that paragraph that we just read. Pandering is one. Pandering is means basically you're saying things to get people to like you or get people to be on your side. That's pandering. Obsequious is, I don't actually know the definition offhand. I could kind of guess based on context clues. Obsequious flattery, maybe like pointless flattery. How do I spell this? Obsequious. It means to obedient or attentive to an excessive or servile degree. So basically like you're giving flattery to like a slave would to their master, right? So it's not like true or meaningful. An endless parade of sycophants. So sycophants are like people who, parade of sycophants. It's a group of people when you talk about, I just want to make sure I'm right here. Sycophant. Person who acts servile, obsequiously, there's that word again, towards someone important in order to gain advantage. So you basically try to win over favor with powerful people so that you can get power yourself. And he's saying that I get this all the time. As a scythe, in this world, they would get them all the time because they're the only people in the entire world that can kill you. So that's powerful. So people will try to get on the scythe's good side, so to speak, so that they can avoid being killed. Okay. And Faraday is saying, we're not really gods. We're just people. We just have to do a job just like anybody else. I'm human, basically. He reminds him at the end of the paragraph. Okay, going back. Then he went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest, sharpest knife he could find. He swished it back and forth, getting a feel for how it would cut through the air. Ben's wails grew, and his father's grip tightened on him. The scythe approached her mother. Citra was ready to hurl herself in front of her to block the blade, but instead of swinging the knife, the man held out his other hand. "Kiss my ring." No one was expecting this, least of all Citra. Citra's mother stared at him, shaking her head, not willing to believe. You're granting me immunity? For the kindness and the meal you served, I grant you 1 year immunity from gleaning. No scythe may touch you. But she hesitated. Grant it to my children instead. Still, the scythe held out his ring to her. It was a diamond the size of his knuckle and with a dark core. It was the same ring all scythes wore. I am offering it to you, not them. But, Jenny, just do it, insisted their father. And so she did. She knelt and kissed his ring, and her DNA was read and was transmuted to the Scythedom's immunity database. In an instant, the world knew that Jenny Terranova was safe from gleaning for the next 12 months. The scythe looked to his ring, which now glowed faintly red, indicating that the person before him had immunity from gleaning. He grinned, satisfied. And finally, he told them the truth. I'm here to glean your neighbor, Bridget Chadwell, Scythe Faraday informed them. But she was not yet home, and I was hungry. He gently touched Ben on the head, as if delivering some sort of benediction. It seemed to calm him. Then the scythe moved to the door, the knife still in his hand, leaving no question as to the method of their neighbor's gleaning. But before he left, he turned to Citra. You see through the facades of the world, Citra Terranova. You'd make a good scythe. Citra recoiled. I'd never want to be one. That, he said, is the first requirement. Then he left to kill their neighbor. Are we close to the end of this chapter? Yeah, we are. Okay. We got like one little section left of this chapter. This is so good. I love this intro because it's like, I don't know if he planned to go to Citra's house, but obviously she and Scythe Faraday are going to meet again. There's something else in this that they talk about, the kissing of the ring. I just thought of this. Like, the last time people actually, kissed somebody's ring, right? Like, when it was something that historically could happened, right? Like, you would have kings and stuff, and they'd be like, kiss my ring, right? And it showed, favor from the king, basically. So that ritual is mimicked here, but it is... there's an actual effect from kissing the ring. You can't be gleaned. You're free from real death for a year. which is interesting. It's such an interesting way to choose to show this and to like present this in this world. You know, the fact that the Scythes wear robes, it's kind of like a Grim Reaper. They have a ring that you have to kiss. Everyone's really like acting like a servant toward them. So it's like, it's just really interesting the way that that's how it's presented, because, you know, it's in the future. You know, it's not like it's a historical fiction book. Like, it is actually from it's like set in the future, and that they have carried on these like so-called rituals over time. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. The dystopian music is a little loud for me, but as long as it's okay for everybody else, that's what matters. Which doesn't show to be too bad, so I'm just gonna keep it down there. Okay. Okay, we're coming to the end of the first chapter here. They didn't speak of it that night. So Scythe Faraday has left their house to go kill their neighbor, glean their neighbor. They didn't speak of it that night. No one spoke of gleanings, as if speaking about it might bring it upon them. There were no sounds from next door, no screams, no pleading wails, or perhaps the Terra Nova's TV was turned up too loud to hear it. That was the first thing Citra's father did once the Scythe left, turn on the TV and blast it to drown out the gleaning on the other side of the wall. But it was unnecessary, because however the Scythe accomplished his task, it was done quietly. Citra found herself straining to hear something, anything. Both she and Ben discovered in themselves a morbid curiosity that made them both secretly ashamed. An hour later, Honorable Scythe Faraday returned. It was Citra who opened the door. His ivory robe held not a single splatter of blood. Perhaps he had a spare one. Perhaps he had used the neighbor's washing machine after her gleaning. The knife was clean too, and he handed it to Citra. "We don't want it," Citra told him, feeling pretty sure she could speak for her parents on this matter. "We'll never use it again." "But you must use it," he insisted, "so that it reminds you." "Remind us of what?" "That a scythe is merely an instrument of death, but it is your hand that swings me. You and your parents and everyone else in this world. We are the wielders of scythes." And he gently put the knife in her hands. "We are all accomplices. You must share the responsibility." That may have been true, but after he was gone, Citra still dropped the knife into the trash, like a murder accomplice would in a real-life murder situation. Okay, that's the end of the first chapter. Oh, so intense already, but I really like Citra. Just for the sheer fact that she is super relatable and easy to like view the novel through, like, and view the world through, because she clearly, obviously she lives in it. So she has like the preconceived notion of what's going on, but also she has like I think the very human feeling about death that most people have, right? Is that we don't want it, right? We don't want it to happen. But also like there's this kind of sick curiosity about it too, right? She says like it made her feel ashamed, but both the young kids were kind of like, interested. They actually went to go talk to the Scythe. So I don't know. It's interesting. Okay. We have another journal entry. Again, this book is different. This page is different than the rest of the book. I think they have journal entries like in between almost every chapter, which kind of helps add to the story and the plot and the world. Okay. It is the most difficult thing a person can be asked to do. And knowing that it is for the greater good doesn't make it any easier. People used to die naturally. Old age used to be a terminal affliction, not a temporary state. There were invisible killers called diseases that broke the body down. Aging couldn't be reversed, and there were accidents from which there were no return. Planes fell from the sky. Cars actually crashed. There was pain, misery, despair. It's hard for most of us to imagine a world so unsafe, with dangers lurking in every unseen, unplanned corner. All of that is behind us now, and yet a simple truth remains. People have to die. It's not as if we can go somewhere else. The disasters on the moon and Mars colonies proved that. We have one very limited world, and although death has been defeated as completely as polio, people still must die. The ending of human life used to be in the hands of nature, but we stole it. Now we have a monopoly on death. We are its sole distributor. I understand why there are scythes and how important and how necessary the work is, but I often wonder why I had to be chosen. And if there is some internal world after this one, what fate awaits a taker of lives? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Oh, that was the last journal entries from the same person. And we might meet them later. That's all I'm going to say. All right, we're heading into chapter 2, everybody. Okay. Are we keeping the dystopian music? I think I'm going to try a different one. We're going to try this one.
Hello to Webflow, the world's
No.
most powerful all-in-one design platform.
Okay. This has got some rain. I like that. It's supposed to be November, so that makes sense. Turn it up a little bit. Okay, here we go. Chapter 2. 0.303%. Tiger Salazar had hurled himself out a 39-story window, leaving a terrible mess on the marble plaza below. His own parents were so annoyed by it, they didn't come to see him. But Rowan did. Rowan Damisch was just that kind of friend. He sat by Tiger's bedside in the revival center, waiting for him to awake from speed healing. Rowan didn't mind. The revival center was quiet, peaceful. It was a nice break from the turmoil of his home, which lately had been filled with more relatives than any human being should be expected to endure. Cousins, second cousins, siblings, half-siblings, and now his grandmother had returned home after turning the corner for a third time with a new husband and a baby on the way. "You're going to have a new aunt, Rowan," she announced. "Isn't it wonderful?" The whole thing pissed Rowan's mother off, because this time, Grandma had reset all the way down to 25, making her 10 years younger than her daughter. Now Mom felt pressured to turn the corner herself, if only to keep up with Grandma. Grandpa was much more sensible. He was off in Euroscandia, charming the ladies and maintaining his age at a respectable 38. Rowan, at 16, had resolved he would experience gray hair before he turned his first corner. And even then, he would reset so far as to be embarrassing. Some people reset to 21, which was the youngest genetic therapy could take a person. Rumor was, though, that there were workings on ways of resetting down to the teens, which Rowan found ridiculous. Why would anyone in their right mind want to be a teenager more than once? Excuse me. When he glanced back to his friend, Tiger's eyes were open and studying Rowan. "Hey," Rowan said. "How long?" Tiger asked. 4 days. Tiger pumped his fist in triumph. Yes, a new record. He looked at his hands, as if taking stock of the damage. There was, of course, no damage left. One did not wake up from speed healing until there was nothing left to heal. "Do you think it was jumping from such a high floor that did it, or was it the marble plaza?" "Probably the marble," Rowan said. "Once you reach terminal velocity, it doesn't matter how high you are when you jump." "Did I crack it? Did they have to replace the marble?" "I don't know, Tiger, geez, enough already." Tiger leaned back into his pillow, immensely pleased with himself. Best splat ever. Okay, if you didn't realize it yet, Tiger is talking about jumping off of a building without any way of stopping before he hits the ground. So because you can't die in this world, if something does happen to you, like an accident or you fall off a building, you basically get sent to a revival center, which is a modern day hospital. And all of the people in the world have these nanites in their blood that basically heal them, that make them, not dead from disease or from like falling off a building. So Tiger and Rowan are 16, I assume, like they're like around the same age. And he is talking about splatting, which is a trend that some teens have taken to basically jumping off a building. And so that's why when at the start of the chapter we read about Tiger hurling himself off a 39-story window, and his parents are annoyed by it. They're annoyed because they know he didn't fully die. They're just mad that he did it because, like, what a silly, extreme thing to do. But in this world, it makes sense. It does make sense that there would be people who would try to experience something that people today aren't able to experience, which is come back from jumping off a building. And they call it splatting. There's also another term that they talk about, and I think we'll hear about it later from Rowan, that there's also like another trend where people will shoot themselves just to experience it. But that's the thing, is they live, they do not die. So they have this kind of cavalier attitude toward things that can kill people that live in today. Okay, if that makes any sense. I think Neal Shusterman does a way better job of describing it. So let's just continue. Rowan found he had patience to wait for his friend to wake up, but no patience for him now that he was conscious. Why do you even do it? I mean, it's just such a waste of time. Tiger shrugged. I like the way it feels on the way down. Besides, I gotta remind my parents that the lettuce is there. That made Rowan chuckle. It was Rowan who had coined the term lettuce kid to describe them. Both of them were born sandwiched somewhere in the middle of large families, and were far from being their parents' favorites. I got a couple of brothers that are the meat, a few sisters that are the cheese and tomatoes, so I guess I'm the lettuce. The idea caught on, and Rowan had started a club called the Iceberg Heads at school, which now bragged almost 24 members, although Tiger often teased that he was going to go rogue and start a romaine revolt. A lot of puns there about lettuce. It's funny. It's pretty funny. Also, I think it's kind of interesting that Rowan is using the metaphor of a sandwich to describe a family, because, like, would the parents be the buns? Kind of weird. But it is kind of funny because it does make sense about like how family structures work, and how I don't have siblings, so I don't know what that's like, but I imagine that being a middle child can have a big effect on a kid, especially if there's like multiple kids in the family, like lots of children in the family. Tiger had started splatting a few months ago. Rowan tried it once and found it a monumental pain. He ended up behind all his schoolwork, and his parents levied all forms of punishment, which they promptly forgot to enforce, one of the perks of being the lettuce. Still, the thrill of the drop wasn't worth the cost. Tiger, on the other hand, had become a splatting junkie. You gotta find a new hobby, man, Rowan told him. I know the first revival is free, but the rest must be costing your parents a fortune. Yeah, and for once they have to spend their money on me. Wouldn't you rather they buy you a car? Revival is compulsory, Tiger said. A car is optional. If they're not forced to spend it, they won't. Rowan couldn't argue with that. He didn't have a car either, and doubted his parents would ever get him one. The public cars were clean, efficient, and drove themselves. His parents had argued, what would be the point in spending good money on something that he didn't need? Meanwhile, they threw money in every direction but his. We're roughage, Tiger said. If we don't cause a little intestinal distress, no one knows we're there. In the following morning, I love that Tiger kind of continues on with the lettuce metaphor because it totally fits his character. I'd say in the book that Tiger would be considered the comic relief because he's both Citra and Rowan, you're going to see, are, because now we're reading the point of view from Rowan's perspective, third person limited from Rowan's perspective, but they're the two young people who are pitted against each other to become Scythes. And Tiger is Rowan's friend, and he's like this really funny guy. Like, he doesn't take anything seriously, and so he tries to joke around with Rowan, and I think he does add a lot of like comedic value to the book, although it's not like a lot. There's not a lot of chapters with him, unfortunately. The following morning, Rowan came face to face with a Scythe. It wasn't unheard of to see a Scythe in his neighborhood. You couldn't help but run into one once in a while, but they didn't often show up in high school. The encounter was Rowan's fault. Punctuality was not his strong point, especially now that he was expected to escort his younger siblings and half-siblings to their school before hopping into a public car and hurrying to his. He had just arrived and was heading to the attendant's window when the Scythe came around the corner, his spotless ivory robe flaring behind him. Once, when hiking with his family, Rowan had gone off on his own and had encountered a mountain lion. The tight feeling in his chest now, as well as the weak feeling in his loins, had been exactly the same. fight or flight, his biology said. But Rowan had done neither. Back then, he had fought those instincts and calmly raised his arms as he had read to do, making himself look larger. It had worked, and the animal bounded away, saving him a trip to the local revival center. Now, at the sudden prospect of a scythe before him, Rowan had an odd urge to do the same, as if raising his hands above his head would frighten the scythe away. The thought made him involuntarily laugh out loud. The last thing you want to do is laugh at a scythe. "Could you direct me to the main office?" the man asked. Rowan considered giving him directions and heading the opposite way, but decided that he was too cowardly. "I'm going there," Rowan said. "I'll take you." The man would appreciate helpfulness, and getting on the good side of a scythe couldn't hurt. Okay, did they say what color robes the scythe has yet? Ivory, so we know who it is. It's Scythe Faraday. Okay, I'll take you. I said that already. Rowan led the way, passing other kids in the hall. Students who, like him, were late or were just on an errand. They all gawked and tried to disappear into the wall as he and Scythe passed. Somehow, walking through the hall with a scythe became less frightening when there were others to bear the fear instead. And Rowan couldn't deny that that was a bit heady to be cast as a scythe's trailblazer, riding in the cone of such respect. It wasn't until they reached the office that the truth hit home. The scythe was going to glean one of Rowan's classmates today. Everyone in the office stood the moment they saw the scythe, and he wasted no time. "Please have Cole Whitlock called to the office immediately." "Cole Whitlock?" said the secretary. The scythe didn't repeat himself because he knew she had heard. She just wasn't willing to believe. "Yes, Your Honor. I'll do it right away." Rowan knew Cole. Hell, everyone knew Cole Whitlock. Just a junior, he had already risen to be the school's quarterback. He was going to take them all the way to the league championship for the first time in forever. The secretary's voice shook powerfully when she made the call into the intercom. She coughed as she said his name, choking it up, and the scythe patiently waited Cole's arrival. The last thing Rowan wanted to do was antagonize a scythe. He should have just slunk off to the attendance window, gotten his readmit, and gone to class. But, as with the mountain lion, he had just had to stand his ground. It was a moment that would change his life. "You're gleaning our star quarterback. I hope you know that." The scythe's demeanor, so cordial a moment before, took a turn toward tombstone. "I can't see how that is any of your business." "You're in my school," Rowan said. "I guess that makes it my business." Then self-preservation kicked in, and he strode to the attendance window just out of the scythe's line of sight. He handed his forged tardy note, all the while muttering, "Stupid, stupid, stupid," under his breath. He was lucky he wasn't born in a time when death was natural, because he'd probably never survive to adulthood. As he turned to leave the office, he saw a bleak-eyed Cole Whitlock being led into the principal's office by the scythe. The principal voluntarily ejected himself from his own office, then looked to the staff for an explanation, but only received the teary-eyed shaking of their heads. No one seemed to notice Rowan still lingering there. Who cared about the lettuce when the beef was being devoured? That is a great metaphor that has carried on through the last chapter. Can I just say, I didn't realize how good that was until this very moment. So he compares himself as the lettuce in like a sandwich, and obviously Cole Whitlock, the star quarterback, would be the beef. He's like the big, tough guy who can do things, and he's being devoured. He's being gleaned by the scythe. That is masterful. Masterful. As a reader, I appreciate that. As a writer, I also very much appreciate that. That's very good writing. He slipped past the principal, who saw him just in time to put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, you don't want to go in there." He was right. Rowan didn't want to go in there, but he went anyway, closing the door behind him. There were 2 chairs in front of the principal's well-organized desk. The scythe sat in one, Cole in the other, hunched and sobbing. The scythe burned Rowan a glare. The mountain lion, thought Rowan. Only this one actually had the power to end human life. "His parents aren't here," Rowan said. "He should have someone with him." "Are you family?" "Does it matter?" Then Cole raised his head. "Please don't make Ronald go," he pleaded. "It's Rowan." Cole's expression shot to higher horror as if this error... I'm sorry, that's actually kind of funny. As a person who gets people's names wrong, like worries about getting people's names wrong all the time, it's actually hilarious. Cole's expression shot to higher horror as if this error somehow sealed the deal. I knew that. I did. I really did. For all his bulk and bravado, Colt Whitlock was just a scared little kid. Is that what everyone became in the end? Rowan supposed only a Scythe could know. Rather than forcing Rowan to leave, the Scythe said, "Grab a chair then. Make yourself comfortable." As Rowan went around to pull out the principal's desk chair, he wondered if the Scythe was being ironic or sarcastic, or if he didn't even know what making oneself comfortable was impossible in his presence. "You can't do this to me," Cole begged. "My parents will die. They'll just die." "No, they won't," the Scythe corrected. "They'll live on." "Can you at least give me a few minutes to prepare?" Oh, that's Rowan, sorry, my bad. "Can you at least give him a few minutes to prepare?" Rowan asked. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" "I'm asking you for some mercy." The Scythe glared at him again, but this time it was somehow different. He wasn't just delivering intimidation, he was extracting something, studying something in Rowan. "I've done this for many years," the Scythe said. "In my experience, a quick and painless gleaning is the greatest mercy I can show." "Then at least give him a reason. Tell him why it has to be him." "It's random, Rowan," Cole said. "Everyone knows that. It's just freaking random." But there was something in the Scythe's eyes that said otherwise. So Rowan pressed. "There's more to it, isn't there?" The Scythe sighed. He didn't have to say anything. He was, after all, a Scythe, above the law in every way. He owed no one an explanation, but he chose to give one anyway. Removing old age from the equation, statistics from the age of mortality cite 7% of deaths are being automobile related. Of those, 31% involved the use of alcohol, and of those, 14% were teenagers. Then he tossed Rowan a small calculator from the principal's desk. "Figure it out yourself." "No, not me. Thanks. I mean, with a calculator, yeah, I could maybe figure that out." Rowan took his time crunching the numbers, knowing that every second taken was a second of life he brought for Cole. 0.303%, Rowan finally said. "That's the title of the chapter." "Which means," said the Scythe, "about 3 out of every 1,000 souls I glean will fit that profile. 1 out of every 333. Your friend here just got a new car and has a record of drinking to excess. So of the teens who fit that profile, I made a random choice." Cole buried his head in his hands, his tears intensifying. "I'm such an idiot!" He pressed his palms against his eyes, as if trying to push them deep within his head. "So tell me," the Scythe said calmly to Rowan, "has the explanation eased his gleaning or made his suffering worse?" Rowan shrunk a bit in his chair. "Enough," said the Scythe. "It's time." Then he produced from a pocket in his robe a small paddle that was shaped to fit over his hand. It had a cloth back and a shiny metallic palm. "Cole, I have chosen for you a shock that will induce cardiac arrest. Death will be quick, painless, and nowhere near as brutal as the car accident you would have suffered in the age of mortality." Suddenly Cole thrust his hand out, grabbing Rowan's and holding it tightly. Rowan allowed it. He wasn't family. He wasn't even Cole's friend before today. But what was the saying? Death makes the whole world kin. I don't know if that's a saying or where that's from, actually. Let me look that up. Death makes the whole world kin. I just want a phrase. Where does it come from? Comes from this book. There's no other, it's not like a saying. I honestly haven't heard that before. But maybe I have. I don't know. It's not from anything. I guess it's, like Rowan said, it's just a saying. How he would know, I don't know. Okay. Rowan wondered if a world without death would then make everyone strangers. He squeezed Cole's hand tighter, a silent promise that he wouldn't let go. "Is there anything you want me to tell people?" Rowan asked. "A million things," said Cole, "but I can't think of any of them." Rowan resolved that he would make up Cole's last words to share with his loved ones, and they would be fine words, comforting ones. Rowan would find a way to make sense of the senseless. "I'm afraid you'll have to let go of his hand before the procedure," the Scythe said. "No," Rowan told him. "The shock could stop your heart too," the Scythe warned. "So what?" said Rowan. "They'll revive me." Then he added, "Unless you've decided to glean me too." Rowan was aware that he had just dared a Scythe to kill him. In spite of the risk, he was glad he had done it. "Very well. and without waiting an instant longer, the scythe pressed the paddle to Cole's chest. Rowan's vision went white, then dark. His entire body convulsed. He flew backward out of his chair and hit the wall behind him. It might have been painless for Cole, but not for Rowan. It hurt. It hurt more than anything, more pain than a person is supposed to feel. But then the microscopic pain-killing nanites in his blood released their numbing opiates. The pain subsided as those opiates took effect. And when his vision cleared, he saw Cole slumped in the chair and the scythe reaching over to close his sightless eyes. The gleaning was complete. Cole Whitlock was dead. The scythe stood. Poor Cole. Our star quarterback, no! How could he? It's horrible. Sorry, I'm just checking something very quickly. There we go. That's what I'm checking. The scythe stood and reached out to offer Rowan his hand, but Rowan didn't take it. He rose from the floor on his own, and though Rowan felt not an ounce of gratitude, he said, "Thank you for letting me stay." The scythe regarded him a little... Okay, I didn't put a timer on this. The scythe regarded him a little too long, then said, "You stood your ground for a boy you barely knew. You comforted him at the moment of his death, bearing the pain of the jolt. You bore witness, even though no one called you to do so." Rowan shrugged. "I did what anyone would do." "Did anyone else offer?" the scythe put to him. "Your principal? The office staff? Any of the dozens of students we passed in the hall?" "No," Rowan had to admit. "But what does it matter what I did? He's still dead, and you know what they say about good intentions. They lead to hell." The scythe nodded and glanced down at his ring, sitting so fat on his finger. "I suppose now you'll ask me for immunity." Rowan shook his head. "I don't want anything from you." "Fair enough." The scythe turned to go, but hesitated before he opened the door. "Be warned that you will not receive any kindness from anyone but me for what you did here today," he said. I'm sorry, I'm going to read that again because it's kind of an important line, so let me back up. "Fair enough." The scythe turned to go, but hesitated before he opened the door. "Be warned that you will not receive any kindness from anyone but me for what you did here today," he said. "But remember that good intentions pave many roads. Not all of them lead to hell." Okay, now I'm at a break. So we've seen Scythe Faraday. Rowan doesn't know Scythe Faraday is his name yet. But we've seen Scythe Faraday meet two main characters in this book, Citra and Rowan. And he's had a pretty interesting experience with both of them. Both of them very different, right? Rowan was actually present when the scythe gleaned his classmate, and Citra was not. But they both had a very intense kind of interaction with him that showed him how they perceived death and how they felt about it. And I think it is important to note that Rowan did do something that not anybody else offered to do, which was stay with Cole when he was killed or gleaned by the scythe. And that is really powerful, speaks volumes. All of the adults in the school didn't offer to do that, but Rowan did. And it does show kind of his ethical beliefs, how he feels about death, his perception of it is kind of similar to how we would perceive it. So I feel like that's why Citra and Rowan are so easily relatable, because they have very similar views about death that we might have about it in our time period. Okay, continuing on in chapter 2. The slap was just as jarring as the electric shock, even more so because Rowan wasn't expecting it. It came just before lunch, as he was standing at his locker, and flew in with such force it knocked him back, making the row of lockers resound like a steel drum. "You were there and you didn't stop it!" Mara Pavlik's eyes flared with grief and righteous indignation. She looked ready to reach up his nostrils with her long nails and extract his brain. "You just let him die!" Mara had been Cole's girlfriend for over a year. Like Cole, she was a highly popular junior, and as such would actively avoid any interaction with sophomore rabble such as Rowan. But these were extraordinary circumstances. "It wasn't like that," Rowan managed to blurt out before she swung again. This time, he deflected her hand. She broke a nail, but didn't seem to care. If nothing else, Cole's gleaning had given her perspective. It was exactly like that. You went in there to watch him die. Others had begun to gather, drawn, as most are, to the scent of conflict. He looked to the crowd for a sympathetic face, someone who might take his side. But all he saw in the faces of his classmates was communal disdain, like looking down on somebody. Mara was speaking and slapping for all of them. This is not what Rowan had expected. Not that he wanted pats on the back for coming to Cole's aid in his last moments, but he wasn't expecting such an unthinkable accusation. What? Are you nuts? Rowan shouted at her, at all of them. You can't stop a scythe from gleaning. I don't care, she wailed. You could have done something, but all you did was watch. I did do something. I held his hand. She slammed him back into the locker with more strength than he thought she could possibly have. You're lying. He'd never hold your hand. He'd never touch any part of you. And then I should have held his hand. Around them, the other kids scowled and whispered things as they clearly wanted him to hear. I saw him walking in the hall with Scythe like they were best buddies. They came into school together this morning. I heard he gave Scythe Cole's name. Someone told me he actually helped. He stormed to the obnoxious kid who had made the last accusation, Ralphie or something or other. Heard from who? No one else was in the room, you moron. But it didn't matter. Rumors adhered to no logic but their own. Don't you get it? I didn't help the Scythe. I helped Cole, Rowan insisted. Yeah, helped him into the grave, someone said, and everyone else grumbled in agreement. It was no use. He had been tried and convicted, and the more he denied it, the more convinced they'd be of his guilt. They didn't need his act of courage. What they needed was someone to blame, someone to hate. They couldn't take their wrath out on the Scythe, but Rowan Damisch was the perfect candidate. I'll bet he got immunity for helping, a kid said. A kid who'd always been his friend. I didn't. Good, said Mara with absolute contempt. Then I hope the next Scythe comes for you. He knew she meant it, not just in the moment, but forever. And if the next Scythe did come for him, she would relish the knowledge of his death. It was a darkly sobering thought that there were now people in this world who actively wished him dead. It was the one thing not to be noticed. It was something else entirely to be the repository of an entire school's I can't say this word. I'm sorry. To be the repository of an entire school's enmity, which is like to make an enemy of, to be an enemy of somebody. Only then did the Scythe's warning come back to him, that he would receive no kindness for what he had done for Cole. The man had been right, and he hated the Scythe for it, just as the others hated Rowan. Okay, again, love this chapter. Especially love that scene where he gets bullied by all his classmates, because you'd think he did do a good thing, right? Like, he should be praised. He should be offering comfort. Other people should be offering comfort to him. But in this world, I think there's like a different perspective. And if you think about it, the girlfriend kind of says it right there, what she's really upset about. The fact that she wasn't there to be with Cole when he died, right? Rowan, who doesn't even know him, was there to hold his hand. And like, you know, you want to be the person who's there with your loved one when they go, right? You want to be close to them, experience that with them, experience their final moments, because it is their final moments with them. But sometimes it doesn't always happen. And in the case, Scythe Faraday makes a good point. Cole, in the age of mortality, in our day and age, if Cole was one of those teenagers who got so drunk he went driving and got killed, then he may not have been with his girlfriend when it happened. She may not have found out until he was already dead in the age of mortality in our time period. Or she could have been in there with him and died herself. So, and grief brings out all of these things in people, right? It brings out the denial and the hatred and the lashing out and the rage, because you don't really know what to believe, especially if something happens that's sudden. There's no expectation of it. It's not like you've been waiting for it. It's like it just happens one day. Just walks into school and he's chosen to be killed. So that, I think, is a big part of it as well. Unfortunately for Rowan, like they outline in the book, they need somebody to blame. They need someone to point their finger at and be mad at and have a reason to be mad that the most popular kid in school is dead. If it were our time, people would be mad at alcohol, driving. I don't know. There would be other people who would kind of get fired up about like drinking and driving and stuff. And people do that, and it is good. But sometimes when you know somebody was there when they died and you don't really know how they died, or you do know how they died and it was purposeful, you're angry at that person, right? Think of like a murder or accomplice to murder. All right, new journal entry. We're moving into a new chapter. I'm going to keep going. Let's see, how far are we from the end of the first part? I thought that it was like 60 pages. The first part is actually pretty short. There we go. Yeah, 64. So we're almost halfway there. We might make it through the first part here. 2042. It's a year that every school child knows. It was the year when computational power became infinite, or so close to infinite that it could no longer be measured. It was the year we knew everything. The cloud evolved into the thunderhead. And now all there is to know about everything resides in the near infinite memory of the thunderhead for anyone who wants to access it. But like so many things, once we had possession of infinite knowledge, it suddenly seemed less important, less urgent. Yes, we know everything, but I often wonder if anyone bothers to look at all that knowledge. There are academics, of course, who study what we already know, but to what end? The very idea of schooling used to be about learning so that we could improve our lives and the world. But a perfect world needs no improvement. Like most everything else we do, education from grade school through the highest of universities is just a way to keep us busy. 2042 is the year we conquered death, and also the year we stopped counting. Sure, we still had numbered years for a few more decades, but at the moment of immortality passing, time ceased to matter. I don't know exactly when things switched over to the Chinese calendar, year of the dog, year of the goat, the dragon, and so on. And I can't exactly say when animal activists around the world began calling for equal billing for their own favorite species, adding in year of the otter and the whale and the penguin. And I couldn't tell you when they stopped repeating, and when it was decreed that every year henceforth would be named after a different species. All I know for sure is that this is the year of the ocelot. As for the things I don't know, I'm sure they're all up there in the thunderhead for anyone with the motivation to look. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Okay, so we get another journal entry kind of giving us some information about the world. I think it's really interesting that the kind of lore behind this idea of conquering death comes from the cloud, comes from basically the cloud becoming sentient and like understanding knowledge and being able to figure out all of the problems of the world. And so everybody has access to it. So at any time, anybody could go and look up what's the meaning of life, and the thunderhead would be able to say. It's also really cool the way that it's kind of evolved from years into naming the years by animals, which is also really interesting, especially because it's like time doesn't really matter if you live forever. So how would you measure time, or how would you measure the passing of something as significant as a year? Because they still have things that they have to meet annually on, and we're going to read about that soon. 2042 is kind of crazy because we're in 2022, and that's 40 years from now. That's crazy. It's scary. I wonder what will actually happen in 2042. Yeah. I like when books do that, when they put a year, like, specifically, like, close in the future, because then you could be like, oh, when's it going to happen? Okay, there's something else in this that I wanted to talk about, which is, I don't know, the journal entry mentioning, like, school, right, is just a way to keep us busy, right? There's a perfect world, so we don't have to get any better, so everyone's just kind of, like, having fun, being alive, trying to figure out, you know, what keeps them happy. Interesting. I love the journal entries. Probably one of my favorite parts of the book. Okay, chapter 3. The Force of Destiny. Oh, also, I knew what I wanted to mention. I like that. It changes like narrative points of view. So in the chapters that we read with the regular book, you have the third person limited point of view, either from Citra or Rowan's perspective, and they kind of do alternate quite a bit. And then in between, you have these journal entries, which are written from a different point of view. They're written from a first person perspective because it's a diary entry. So we get a lot of the more of the we and the me and the I and the our. And it talks really more as like a journal entry, somebody kind of pondering the big questions of the day from their own perspective. And it does make you wonder, who is H.S. Curie? Are they a person who's still alive? Are they, why would we be reading their journal entries in between Rowan and Citrus? So something, a little intrigue, a little mystery to kind of keep you interested as you keep reading. Okay, so I think we're going to change from this rain to something else. Can we do not rain, dark coast, songs for post-apocalypse? Maybe? Okay. Yeah, this is okay. Okay, chapter 3 is entitled The Force of Destiny. The invitation came to Citra in early January. It arrived by post, which was the first indication that it was out of the ordinary. I'm sorry, I'm just checking to make sure this is all good. I'm taking like a quick break. I might actually, no, I really want to keep reading. I want to try and get further as I can. We're on page 31, so I think we'll definitely make it before I'm ready to be done. Okay, yeah. Okay. The invitation came to Citra in early January. It arrived by post, which was the first indication that it was out of the ordinary. Post is like the mail, just so you know. In Britain, I think, is where they call it the post. I don't know how much of the language is influenced here. I actually don't know if Neal Shusterman is American or British. The book is set in mid-America or mid-America, which is we would assume America or the region of America, or a part of America. But it does make you wonder how much of the language is kind of crossed over, because there are other regions that they talk about in the book as well. There were only 3 types of communications that arrived by post: packages, official business, or letters from the eccentric. Eccentric meaning kind of off the wall or like interesting, weird. The only type of people who still wrote letters. This appeared to be of the 3rd variety. Well, open it, Ben said, more excited by the envelope than Citra was. It had been handwritten, making it even odder. True, handwriting was still offered as an elective, but aside from herself, she knew few people who had taken it. Like, not just cursive writing, but handwriting, writing things out with pen and paper, is an elective. She tore the envelope open and pulled out a card that was the same eggshell color as the envelope, then read to herself before reading it aloud. The pleasure of your company is requested at the Grand Civic Opera, January 9th, 7 p.m. There was no signature. No address. There was, however, a single ticket in the envelope. The opera, said Ben. Ew. Citra couldn't agree more. Could it be some sort of school event? Their mother asked. Citra shook her head. If it was, it would say so. She took the invitation and envelope from Citra to study them herself. Well, whatever it is, it sounds interesting. It's probably some loser's way of asking me on a date because he's too afraid to ask me to my face. Do you think you'll go? Her mother asked. Mom, a boy who invites me to the opera is either joking or delusional. Or he's trying to impress you. Citra grunted and left the room, annoyed by her own curiosity. I'm not going, she called out from her room, knowing full well that she would. The Grand Civic Opera was one of the several places where anyone who was anyone went to be seen. At any given performance, only half the patrons were there for the actual opera. The rest were there to participate in the great melodrama of social climbing and career advancement. Even Citra, who moved in none of those circles, knew the drill. She wore the dress she had bought for the previous year's homecoming dance when she was sure that Hunter Morrison would invite her. Instead, Hunter had invited Zachary Swain, which apparently everyone but Citra knew would happen. They were still a couple, and Citra, until today, hadn't any use for the dress. When she put it on, she was far more pleased When she put it on, she was far more pleased with it than she thought she'd be. Teenage girls change in a year, but now the dress, which was more about wistful thinking last year, actually fit her perfectly. In her mind, she had narrowed down the possibilities of her secret admirer. It could be one of 5, only 2 of whom she would enjoy spending an evening alone with. The other 3 she would endure for the sake of novelty. There was, after all, some fun to be had spending an evening pretending to be pretentious. Her father insisted on dropping her off. Call when you're ready to be picked up. I'll take a public car home. Call anyway, he said. He told her. She looked beautiful for the 10th time. Then she got out and he drove off to make room for the limousines and Bentleys in the drop-off queue. She took a deep breath and went up the marble steps, feeling as awkward and out of place as Cinderella at the ball. Upon entering, she was not directed toward either the orchestra or the central staircase leading to the balcony. You know what? Actually, can we do can we do this? I'm just gonna get some better ambiance music in here real quick. Okay, here we go.
This pride we're all gonna come through.
For the next generation.
Create a short and show support for LGBTQ plus youth.
For every short you create with the hashtag YouTube Pride Challenge,
YouTube will make an additional donation.
Sorry. I forgot my ad blocker is blocked. Oh my goodness, my ad blocker is really blocked. That's 2 ads in a row. Okay, we're getting there. I'm sorry. Okay, perfect. Here we go. Upon entering, she was not directed toward either the orchestra or the central staircase leading to the balcony. Instead, the usher looked at the ticket, looked at her, then looked at the ticket again before calling over a second usher to personally escort her. "What's this all about?" she asked. Her first thought was that it was a forged ticket and she was being escorted to the exit. Perhaps it had been a joke after all, and she was already running a list of suspects through her mind. But then the second usher said, "A personal escort is customary for a box seat, miss." Box seats, Citra recalled, were the ultimate in exclusivity. They were usually reserved for people too elite to sit among the masses. Normal people couldn't afford them, and even if they could, they weren't allowed access. As she followed the usher up the narrow stairs to the left boxes, Citra began to get scared. She knew no one with that kind of money. What if this invitation came to her by mistake? Or if there actually was some sort of big, important person waiting for Citra? What on earth were her or his intentions? "Here we are." The usher pulled back the curtain of the box to reveal a boy her age already sitting there. He had dark hair. Okay, now we know. He had dark hair and light freckled skin. Okay, so he's probably white. He stood up when he saw her, and Citra could see that his suit revealed a little too much of his socks. Because if he's freckled, right? Okay. Hi. Hello. And the usher left the room. "I left you the seat closer to the stage," he said. "Thanks." She sat down, trying to figure out who this was and why he had invited her there. He didn't appear familiar. Should she know him? She didn't want to let on that she didn't recognize him. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Thank you." For what? He held up an invitation that looked exactly like hers. "I'm not much into opera, but hey, it's better than doing nothing at home, so Should I, know you? Citra laughed out loud. She didn't have a mysterious admirer. It appeared they both had a mysterious matchmaker, which set Citra working on another mental list, at the top of which were her own parents. Perhaps this was the son of one of their friends? But this kind of subterfuge was pretty obtuse, even for them. What's so funny? The boy asked, and she showed him her identical invitation. It didn't make him laugh. Instead, he seemed a bit troubled, but didn't share why. He introduced himself as Rowan. Okay, so we know this is Rowan. He's got dark hair, lightly freckled skin, which I guess kind of looked like the boy in the video. I'd have to look at it again. Okay, we're gonna just pause. No, I didn't mean to turn it off. Just pause.
If we are to protect
Okay, really quick, let's go back here.
Scythes must live by a supreme set of rules.
Yeah. And let's see if we can just skip to the part where we see their faces. Okay, so in the book trailer, this is what they say Rowan looks like. Dark hair. Fits, I guess. It fits. Okay, turning back on the, yeah. There we go. Okay. I gotta remember where I left off. I'm sorry. He introduced himself as Rowan, and they shook hands as the lights dimmed. And the curtain went up, and the music exploded to lush and loud for them to be able to hold a conversation. Too lush and loud for them to be able to hold a conversation. The music was rich and pretty. Oh, sorry. The opera was Verdi's La Forza del Destino, the Force of Destiny, which is the title of the chapter. But it clearly wasn't destiny that had hurled these two together. It was a very deliberate hand. The music was rich and pretty. Should I change it to opera music? Maybe this? Here we go. Perfect. Until it became too much for Citra's ears. And the story, while easy to flow, even without a knowledge of Italian, had little resonance for either of them. It was, after all, a work from the age of mortality. War, vengeance, murder, all the themes on which the tale was strung were so removed from modern reality, few could relate. Catharsis could only gather around the theme of love, which, considering that they were strangers trapped in an opera box, was far more uncomfortable than cathartic. So, who do you think invited us? Citra asked as soon as the lights came up for the first act intermission. I'm sorry, I'm losing my place a little bit. I'm sorry. Okay, wait, let me go back. Okay. So who do you think invited us? Citra asked as soon as the lights came up for the first act intermission. Rowan had no more clue than she did, so they shared whatever they could that might help them generate a theory. Aside from them both being 16, they had very little in common. She was from the city, he the suburbs. She had a small family, his was large, and their parents' professions couldn't have been further apart. What's your genetic index? He asked. A rather personal question, but perhaps it could have some relevance. Genetic index is like their makeup of their genes. 22, 37, 12, 14, 15. He smiled. 37% Afric descent. Good for you. That's pretty high. Thanks. He told her that his was 33, 13, 12, 22, 20. She thought to ask him if he knew the sub-index of his other component, because 20% was pretty high. But if he didn't know, the question would embarrass him. Okay, so they're talking about their genetics, which is actually kind of important because it is basically what they look like. It's kind of their genetic makeup, and it influences their physical traits. So if you go by the numbers that they're spitting off, it's actually the percentage of ethnicities, I think, that are represented in their genes. So when he says 37% Afrik descent, it kind of sounds like he's saying 37% descent from African descendants, African heritage, which I think is kind of what the author's going for. That's my assumption as a reader. That's kind of what I think it's about. A lot of these words kind of mix up with our language, so it makes sense. And then we also hear from Rowan. We both have 12% Pan-Asian ancestry, he pointed out. Again, Pan-Asian. Asian being an actual ethnicity in our world. They mean like as a more broad term for that part of the globe, I guess. That's kind of weird for me. I'm not gonna lie, like that part of this book is kind of weird for me because I don't know. It's just like it's a different world, so like there are different things that they deal with. Obviously, if there's no war, there's no real conflict. People aren't fighting with each other based on how they look, or based on where they live, or based on their religious practices. I don't even know if they talk about religious practices in this book. They actually might. We might get to that. But the fact that they do kind of talk very casually about what their ancestry, what their literal genetic ancestry is interesting. Okay. We both have 12% Pan-Asian ancestry, he pointed out. Could that have been something to do with it? But he was grasping at straws. It was merely coincidence. Then, toward the end of intermission, the answers stepped into the box behind them. Good to see you're getting acquainted. Although it had been a few months since their encounter, Citra recognized him immediately. Honorable Scythe Faraday was not a figure you soon forget. You? Rowan said with such severity, it was clear that he had a history with the Scythe as well. I would have arrived sooner, but I had other business. He didn't elaborate, for which Citra was glad. Still, his presence here could not be a good thing. You invited us here to glean us? It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact because Citra was convinced it was true, until Rowan said, I don't think that's what this is about. Scythe Faraday did not make any move to end their lives. Instead, he grabbed an empty chair and sat beside them. I was given this box by the theater director. People always think making offerings to Scythes will prevent them from being gleaned. I had no intention of gleaning her, but now she thinks her gift played a part. People believe what they want to believe, Rowan said, with such authority that told Citra he knew the truth of it. Faraday gestured toward the stage. Tonight we witness the spectacle of human folly and tragedy, he said. Tomorrow we shall live it. The curtain went up on the second act before he could explain his meaning. Okay, so obviously we're getting to the point in the book where Citra and Rowan are going to be asked to be Scythe Faraday's apprentice, which basically means that they're going to learn how to become a Scythe. Crazy. Okay, for 2 months, Rowan had been the school pariah, an outcast of the highest order. Although that sort of thing usually ran its course and diminished over time, it was not the case when it came to the gleaning of Cole Whitlock. Every football game rubbed a healthy dose of salt in the communal wound, and since all of those games were lost, it doubled the pain. Rowan was never particularly popular, nor was he ever the target of derision before, but now he was cornered and beaten on a regular basis. He was shunned, and even his friends actively avoided him. Tiger was no exception. Guilt by association, man, Tiger had said. But we're not in the theater anymore. Okay, let's go to a new sound. I don't want to do fantasy music. I'd like to do... Alright, this is fine. Just go back to this. It's an unfortunate situation, the principal told Rowan when he turned up in the nurse's office, waiting out during lunch for some newly inflicted bruises to heal. You may want to consider switching schools, the school nurse tells him that. Then one day, Rowan gave in to the pressure. He stood on the table in the cafeteria and told everyone the lies they wanted to hear. That Scythe was my uncle, he proclaimed. I told him to glean Cole Whitlock. Of course, they believed every word of it. Kids began to boo and throw food at him until he said, "I want you all to know that my uncle's coming back, and he asked me to choose who gets gleaned next." Food suddenly stopped flying. The glares ceased. And the beatings miraculously stopped. What filled the void was, well, a void. Not a single eye would meet his anymore. Not even his teachers would look at him. A few actually started giving him A's when he was doing B and C work. He began to feel like a ghost in his own life, existing in a forced blind spot of the world. At home, things were normal. His stepfather stayed entirely out of his business, and his mother was preoccupied with too many other things to give much attention to his troubles. They knew what had happened at school and what was happening now, but they dismissed it in that self-serving way parents often have of pretending anything they can't solve is not really a problem. "I want to transfer to a different high school," he told his mother, finally taking his principal's advice, and her response was achingly neutral. "If you think that's best." He was half convinced if he told her he was dropping out of society and joining a tone cult, she'd say, "If you think that's best." So when the opera invitation arrived, he hadn't cared who sent it. Whatever it meant, it was salvation, at least for an evening. The girl he met in the box seat was nice enough, pretty confident, the kind of girl who probably already had a boyfriend, although she never mentioned one. Then the Scythe showed up, and Rowan's world shifted back into a dark place. This was the man responsible for his misery. If he could have gotten away with it, Rowan would have pushed him over the railing, but attacks against Scythe were not tolerated. The punishment was gleaning of the offender's entire family. It was a consequence that ensured the safety of the revered bringers of death. At the close of the opera, Scythe Faraday gave them a card, with very clear instructions. "You will meet me at this address tomorrow morning, precisely at 9. "What should we tell our parents about tonight?" Citra asked. Apparently, she had parents who might care. "Tell them whatever you like. It doesn't matter, as long as you're there tomorrow morning." The address turned out to be the Museum of World Art, the finest museum in the city. It didn't open until 10, but the moment the security guard saw a Scythe coming up the steps of the main entrance, he unlocked the door and let the three of them in without having to be asked. More perks of the position, Scythe Faraday told them. They strolled through the galleries of the old masters in silence, punctuated only by the sound of their footfalls and the Scythe's occasional commentaries. See how El Greco uses contrast to evoke emotional yearning. Look at the fluidity of motion in this Raphael, how it brings intensity to the visual story he tells. Ah, Seurat, prophetic pointillism a century before the pixel. Rowan was the first to ask the necessary question. What does any of this have to do with us? Scythe Faraday sighed in mild irritation, although he probably anticipated the question. "I'm supplying you with lessons that you won't receive in school." "So," said Citra, "you pulled us out of our lives for some random art lesson? Isn't that a waste of your valuable time?" The Scythe laughed, and Rowan found himself wishing he had been the one to make him laugh. "What have you learned so far?" Scythe Faraday asked. Neither had a response, so he asked a different question. Oh, really quick. I think we've just really seen the beginning of Rowan's tendency to be competitive. And we're going to see this with both of them, which I think is really interesting. What I love most about this book is what I'm going to say, is that both Citra and Rowan say and are very open and spoken out about not being a Scythe. Like, they don't want it. Citra says it at the beginning. And Rowan, he's like, he doesn't like Scythe Faraday. He doesn't like him. Obviously, he doesn't want to be a Scythe because of what he'd have to do. But they end up becoming apprentices of Faraday's anyway and following along with his kind of game, so to speak, because that's kind of what it becomes. I think mainly because if you look at it, you look back to like the first chapter when Scythe Faraday visits Citra's mom, it's really the only job in the whole world that has any real meaning, right? Like, okay, people have jobs to make art, people have jobs to do things that they like synthesizing food, right? But Scythe Faraday makes this point at the beginning of the book, is that, like, what is that actually? We're not actually providing anything for people, you know, like we're just kind of taking up time and space. Even the art that they do produce, right? Going to the opera, Citra says they feel so removed from, because there's these concepts of murder and, you know, dying from disease, and that's not something that people in that world currently experience. So it's very removed from them. There's the only thing that can be a part of it that they understand, which is love, right? Relationships. And even then, there's no like stake, right? It's not like that person's going to leave you after a period of time. And they have that possibility, but not as much as they would in the normal day and age, because of the fact that there's very little conflict and war and death. So while they don't want to be it, it is kind of like the only job that in this world that would be of significant use to the world. Okay. What have you learned so far? Scythe Faraday asked. Neither had a response, so he asked a different question. What do you think our conversation would have been like had I brought you to the post-mortality galleries instead of these older ones? Rowan ventured an answer. Probably about how much easier on the eye post-mortal art is. Easier and untroubled. How about uninspired? Prompted the Scythe. That's a matter of opinion, said Citra. Perhaps. But now that you know what you're looking for in this art of the dying, I want you to try to feel it. And he led them to the next gallery. Although Rowan was sure he'd feel nothing, he was wrong. The next room was a large gallery with paintings hanging floor to ceiling. He didn't recognize the artists, but that didn't matter. There was a coherence to the work, as if it had been painted by the same soul, if not the same hand. Some works had a religious theme, others were portraits, and others simply captured the elusive light of daily life with a vibrancy that was missing in post-mortal art. Sometimes commingling in the same canvas. It was in some ways unsettling, but compelling as well. Can we stay in this room a little longer? Rowan asked, which made the Scythe smile. Of course we can. The museum had opened up by the time they were done. Other patrons gave them a wide berth. It reminded Rowan of the way they treated him in school. Citra still seemed to have no clue why Scythe Faraday had called them, but Rowan was beginning to have an idea. He took the kids to a diner where the waitress sat them immediately and brought them menus, ignoring other customers to give them priority. Perk of the position. Rowan noticed that no one came in once they were seated. The restaurant would probably be empty by the time they left. If you want us to provide you with information on people we know, Citra said as her food came, I'm not interested. I gather my own information, Scythe Faraday told her. I don't need a couple of kids to be my informants. But you do need us, don't you? Rowan said. He didn't answer. Instead, he talked about world population and the task of the world's scythes. If not to level it, then to wrangle it into a reasonable ratio. The ratio of population growth to the Thunderhead's ability to provide for humanity requires a certain number of people to be gleaned each year, he told them. For that to happen, we're going to need more scythes. Then he produced, from one of his many pockets hidden in his robe, a scythe's ring identical to the one he already wore. It caught the light in the room, reflecting it, refracting it, but never bending light into the heart of its dark core. 3 times a year, scythes meet at the great assembly called a conclave. We discuss the business of gleaning and whether or not more scythes are needed in our region. Citra now seemed to shrink in her chair. She finally got it. Although Rowan had suspected this, to actually see the ring made him shrink a bit too. The gems on scythe rings were made in those first post-mortal days by early scythes, Faraday said, when society deemed that unnatural death needed to take the place of natural death. There were many more gems made than were needed at the time, for the founders of the scythedom were wise enough to anticipate a need. When a new scythe is required, a gem is placed into a gold setting and it is bestowed upon the chosen candidate. He turned the ring in his fingers, pondering it, sending refracted light dancing around the room. Then he looked them in the eye, first Citra, then Rowan. I just returned from Winter Conclave and have been given this ring so that I may take on an apprentice. Citra backed away. Rowan can do it. I'm not interested. Rowan turned to her, wishing he had spoken. "What makes you think I am?" "I have chosen both of you," Faraday said, raising his voice. "You will both learn the trade, but in the end, only one of you will receive the ring. The other may return home to his or her old life." "Why would we compete for something that neither of us wants?" Citra asked. "Good question." "Therein lies the paradox of the profession," Faraday said. "Those who wish to have the job should not have it, and those who would most refuse to kill are the ones who should." He put the ring away, and Rowan let out his breath, not even realizing he had been holding it. "You are both made of the highest moral fiber," Faraday told them, "and I believe the high ground on which you stand will compel you into my apprenticeship, not because I force it upon you, but because you choose it." Then he left without paying the bill, because no bill was, or would ever be, brought to a Scythe. So here we go. The offer has arrived from Scythe Faraday. He wants them to be the apprentice. Citra asks the obvious question, which is, why would we compete against each other for something that we do not want? And obviously they're going to, right? Because Scythe Faraday is like, you already see Rowan wants to please him, right? Rowan wants to be the one who's like first in line with him. And we're going to see them. We're going to see them think about it. Let's get through the rest of this part. Let me keep going. The nerve! To think he could impress them with airs of culture and then reel them into his sick little scheme. There was no way Citra would ever, under any circumstances, throw away her life by becoming a taker of other people's lives. She told her parents what had happened when they got home that evening. Her father embraced her and she cried into his arms for being given the terrible proposition. Then her mother said something that Citra was not expecting. "Will you do it?" she asked. The fact that she could even ask that question was more of a shock than seeing the ring held out to her that morning. "What?" "It's a difficult choice, I know," her father said. "We'll support you either way." She looked at them as if she had never truly seen them before that moment. How could her parents know her so little that they would think she'd become a Scythe's apprentice? She didn't even know what to say to them. "Would you want me to?" She found herself terrified of their answer. "We want what you want, honey," her mother said, "but look at it in this perspective. A Scythe wants for nothing in this world. All of your needs and desires would be met, and you'd never have fear of being gleaned." And then something occurred to Citra. You'd never have to worry about being gleaned either. A Scythe's family is immune from gleaning for as long as that Scythe lives. Her father shook his head. "It's not about our immunity," and she realized he was telling the truth. "It's not about yours. It's about Ben's," Citra said. To that, they didn't have an answer. The memory of Scythe Faraday's unexpected intrusion into their home was still a dark specter haunting them. At the time, they hadn't known why he was there. He could very well have been there to glean Citra or Ben, but if Citra became a Scythe, they never needed to fear an unexpected visitor again. "You want me to spend my life killing people?" Her mother looked away. "Please, Citra. It's not killing. It's gleaning. It's important. It's necessary. Sure, nobody likes it, but everyone agrees it has to happen and that someone has to do it. Why not you?" Citra went to bed early that night before supper because her appetite was a casualty of the day. Her parents came to her door several times, but she told them to go away. She had never been sure what her life path would take. She had never been sure what path her life would take. She assumed she would go to college, get a degree in something pleasant, then settle into a comfortable job, meet a comfortable guy, and have a nice, unremarkable life. It's not that she longed for such an existence, but it was expected. Not just of her, but of everyone. With nothing to really aspire to, life had become about maintenance, eternal maintenance. Could she possibly find greater purpose in the gleaning of human life? The answer was still a resolute no. But if that were the case, then why did she find it so hard to sleep? For Rowan, the decision wasn't quite so difficult. Yes, he hated the thought of being a Scythe. It sickened him. But what sickened him more was the thought of just about anyone else he knew doing it. He didn't see himself as morally superior to anyone, but he did have a keener sense of empathy. He felt for people. sometimes more than he felt for himself. It's what drove him to Cole's gleaning. It's what brought him to Tiger's side each and every time he splat. And Rowan already knew what it was like to be a Scythe. He would be treated separate and apart from the rest of the world. He was living that now. But could he bear to live it forever? Maybe he wouldn't have to. Scythes got together, didn't they? They had conclaves 3 times a year and befriend one another and must befriend one another. It was the world's most elite job, most elite club, I should say. No, he didn't want to be a part of it, but he had been called to it. It would be a burden, but also an ultimate honor. He didn't tell his family that day because he didn't want them to sway his decision. Immunity for all of them. Of course they'd want him to accept. He was loved, but only as one among a group of older beloved things. It was his sacrifice could save the rest. The greater familial good would be served. In the end, it was the art that did it. The canvases haunted his dreams that night. What must life have been like in the age of mortality? Full of passions, both good and bad. Fear giving rise to faith. Despair giving meaning to elation. They say even the winters were colder and the summers were warmer in those days. To live between the prospects of an unknown eternal sky and a dark, enveloping earth must have been glorious. For how else could it have given rise to such magnificent expression? No one created anything of value anymore. But if by gleaning he could bring back a hint of what once was, it might be worth it. Could he find it in himself to kill another human being? Not just one, but many, day after day, year after year, until he reached his own eternity? Scythe Faraday believed he could. The following morning, before he left for school, he told his mother that a Scythe had invited him to become his apprentice and that he'd be dropping out of school to accept the position. What do you think she says? If you think that's what's best, she said. I feel, okay, can I just say, reading this again, I do feel really bad for Rowan. I like looking at his family structure and how he feels his places in his family seems to be really sad because he doesn't feel like he's like a loved, like fully loved. Like obviously he says, I know I'm loved, but I'm also like a part of a whole group of people that are loved, you know, and like they really kind of care about themselves, right? If you think that's what's best, his mom says. His mom doesn't try to like push him to do anything or stop him or say, what, you know, like, what do you think about that? Like she's just like, yeah, okay, go for it. Whatever you want to do. If you want to do that, do it. Which has got to be, when you're a kid, you do look to your parents for that kind of guidance because they have years of experiences that you don't. Especially when it comes to a really hard decision like this one. You're basically giving up the whole way of life that you know to do this job, to become something else, to become kind of ostracized from the world. So it's a big deal. It's a big question for Rowan, and it does make me feel bad that his family isn't more supportive and wanting him to be, you know, like there for him and like wanting to help him and involve themselves in his life. So, you know, it does make me feel sad for Rowan. It makes me feel sad for Citra too, because I feel like she also has this intense internal conflict, right? Man versus self, where she's worried about what she's going to do for the rest of her life. She could do what is expected of her, go find a nice, tolerable person to spend the rest of your life with and basically spend time with, do things that you like to do. But that may not be what she wants, right? Maybe she wants to do something more meaningful. Maybe she wants to actually, you know, have a meaningful role in society and the world. I'm doing the potty dance, so I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to change the music because this is very post-apocalyptic, but it's got cats on it, which is so cute. I'm going to play this for a quick minute. Just to... and I will be right back. No. I'm just gonna leave it right here. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna be right back. I will be right back. Pause. Okay, I'm just grabbing a quick glass of water. I promise I am grabbing a quick glass of water, but I just want to make sure. Okay, hi, I'll be right back. I'm grabbing some water and then we'll keep reading. Okay, we are not at all far from the end of the first part, so we're going to get we're gonna finish the first part this stream. So get excited. Okay, another journal entry. We just finished chapter 3, I think. Oh, it's a long chapter. Yeah, it was chapter 3. We have a new journal entry. And we're gonna pause our music to go here. Yeah, this will work for us, I think. Yeah, okay. I had my cultural audit today. It happens only once a year, but it's never any less stressful. This year, when they crunched each cultural index from those I gleaned over the past 12 months, I thankfully came up well within accepted parameters. 20% Caucasoid? I think it's supposed to be like Caucasian-esque, but they say Caucasoid, which I think is very funny. 20% Caucasoid, 18% Afric, 20% Pan-Asian, 19% Meso-Latino, 23% other. Sometimes it's hard to know. A person's index is considered private, so we can only go by visible traits, which is weird. For me, that would be so weird. Why wouldn't you go by their actual genetic index? Okay, anyway. I don't know. Maybe there's more to discuss there, but I feel like going by physical traits is like akin to racial profiling. Yeah, so she says, I'm sorry, a person's index is considered private, so we can only go by visible traits, which are no longer as obvious as they had been in past generations. When Scythe's numbers became lopsided, they are disciplined by the High Blade and are assigned their gleanings for the next year rather than being allowed to choose for themselves. It's a sign of shame. The index is supposed to help the world free from cultural and genetic bias, but aren't there underlying factors that we can't escape? For instance, who decided that the first number of one's genetic index would be Caucasoid? From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. When we get further into this book, we will do, I think I want to do a dream cast, the people I think would be the coolest people to play Citra, Rowan, Faraday, because I have, ideas in my head, but I feel like I need to, look at some faces, and it's also helpful. Also, I feel like the only person's, real physical description that we've gotten that's, I feel true is Rowan's, because Citra sees him and acknowledges what he looks like, but we don't really get to see what Rowan says about Citra's appearance. So we just get to guess. I did see there's a website you can use to make Dreamcast, so we'll take a look at that maybe next time and see who, or maybe at the end if we have time, and see who's most voted for each of the characters. Okay, chapter 4, Learner's Permit to Kill. Forget what you think you know about Scythes. Leave behind your preconceived notions. Your education begins today. Citra could not believe she was actually going through with this. What secret, self-destructive part of herself had asserted its will over her? What had possessed her to accept the apprenticeship? Now there was no backing out. Yesterday, on the third day of the new year, Scythe Faraday had come to her apartment and had given a year's immunity to her father and brother. He added several months to her mother's, so their immunity would all expire at the same time. Of course, if Citra was chosen to be a full Scythe, their immunity would become permanent. Her parents were tearful when she left. Citra wondered whether they were tears of sorrow, joy, or relief. Perhaps a combination of all three? "We know you'll do great things in this world," her father had said. And she wondered about bringing death. And she wondered what about bringing death could be considered great. "Do not be so arrogant as to think you have a license to glean. The license is mine and mine alone. At most you have, shall we say, a learner's permit. I will, however, require at least one of you to be present at each of my gleanings, and if I ask you to assist, you will." Citra unceremoniously withdrew from school and said goodbye to friends in awkward little conversations. It's not like I won't be around, I just won't be at school anymore. But who was she kidding? Accepting this apprenticeship put her on the outside of an impenetrable wall. It was both demoralizing yet heartening to know that life would go on without her. And it occurred to her that being a Scythe was like being the living dead. In the world, but apart from it, just a witness to the comings and goings of others. We are above the law, but that does not mean we live in defiance of it. Our position demands a level of morality beyond the rule of law. We must strive for incorruptibility and must assess our motives on a daily basis. So what he's saying here, incorruptibility, basically you have to be able to not be corrupted by others' influence, right? Or fall prey to someone saying, "I'll pay you money if you don't glean me," or "I'll do this for you if you don't glean me," which is corruption, right? Like if you think about it, the most thing that we could compare them to in our world would be cops, right? Police officers. So it's like a police officer taking a bribe from a criminal so that he won't arrest him, or even a judge taking a bribe from someone so that he won't prosecute or convict. So it's the same kind of concept, except it's a literal life and death stake. While she did not wear a ring, Citra was given an armband to identify her as a Scythe's apprentice. Rowan had one too, bright green bands bearing the curved blade of a farmer's scythe, above an unblinking eye, the double symbol of the Scythehood. The symbol would become a tattoo on the arm of the chosen apprentice. Not that anyone would ever see the tattoo, for Scythes are never seen in public without their robes. Do we have the symbol? I don't think there's symbols actually ever shown. Let me see if there's like one on the internet. Scythe symbol. No. Oh, I guess they kind of do. Okay, let's look. Let me show you. Make sure I don't show you anything too bad. Oh, I guess they don't. Okay, I kind of lied. Scythe. Let's do this. Maybe this? Scythedom, right? This kind of looks like what they're talking about. Okay, so it says a curved blade of a farmer's scythe above an unblinking eye. Maybe? I feel like it would look a little different than that. Like maybe like an actual like eye with just the scythe over it. I don't know, that seems to make more sense. Okay, let's keep going. So they would have to get a tattoo. That's pretty cool. I like it when teens books talk about having tattoos. Just because it's like, I don't know, so commonplace now. It used not to be like that. Like tattoos used to be very like kind of taboo and not accepted. But here you would have to get a tattoo for becoming a Scythe. Citra had to tell herself that there was an out. She could fail to perform. She could be a lousy apprentice. She could sabotage herself so completely that Honorable Scythe Faraday would be forced to choose Rowan and return her to her family at the end of the year. The problem was that Citra was very bad at doing things half-assed. It would be much harder for her to fail than to succeed. I will not tolerate any romantic notions between the two of you, so banish the thought from your mind now. Romance in this book. It's real. I think there's definitely probably a lot of people who ship Rowan and Citra. And like, it's funny because like the book is like actively trying to prevent it, but also it feels like there's some kind of like romantic tension between them. After all, they did think that they were on a date when they first met each other. Citra looked over at Rowan when the Scythe said that, and Rowan had shrugged. Not a problem, he said, which irritated Citra. At the very least, he could have voiced some minor disappointment. Yeah, Citra said, no hope of that, with or without the rule. Rowan just grinned at that, which made her even more annoyed. You shall study history, the great philosophers, the sciences. You will come to understand the nature of life and what it means to be human before you are permanently charged with the taking of life. You will also study all forms of killcraft and become experts. Like Citra, Rowan found himself unsettled by his decision to take this on, but he was not going to show it, especially not to Citra. And in spite of the blasé attitude he showed her, he was in fact attracted to her. See? They're total, oh my gosh, they're going to be together. I mean, I don't know. I do know, I did read this book, so that's a lie. But I do think it's interesting that they do kind of have some romantic tension, because they are going to be basically forced to compete against each other to win the prize of becoming a Scythe. I put it in quotes because it's not really like they want to win it. And in spite of the blasé attitude he showed her, he was in fact attracted to her, but he knew even before the Scythe forbade them that such a pursuit would not end well. They were adversaries, after all. Like Citra, Rowan had stood beside Scythe Faraday as the man held out his ring to each member of his family, offering them immunity. His brothers, sisters, half-siblings, grandma, and her all-too-perfect husband, who Rowan suspected might actually be a bot, each in turn knelt respectively and kissed the ring, transmitting their DNA to the worldwide immunity database in the Scythedom's own special cloud, separate and apart from the Thunderhead. This is also kind of important, and they do go into this later in the book, but the Thunderhead, the cloud, which basically is the AI that rules everything, there's a separate, like, blocked off cloud for Scythes, and there's a specific reason for it that they go into later, but it is really interesting that they mention it now. The rule was that all members of an apprentice's household would receive immunity for 1 year, and there were 19 people in Rowan's sprawling household. His mother had mixed feelings because now no one would move out for at least a year to make sure their immunity would become permanent once Rowan received his Scythe's ring, if he got the ring. The only glitch had been when the ring vibrated, giving off a little alarm, refusing immunity to his grandmother's new husband because he was a bot after all. It's so funny that they have bots in this world, like almost like automata. So it's like got this like cyberpunk-esque thing to it. And his grandma's dating a robot. That's interesting. I feel like this whole world is interesting. There's like so many opportunities to talk about things that... So, okay, I want to say this. On the one hand, I love the book. I love the dystopia / utopia, whatever you want to call it. And Rowan and Citra are really interesting characters and relatable characters to read through and understand the book through them. But there are some things where it just makes me wonder, like, if people are able to create robots to marry them, to be their perfect partner, that raises, I feel like, a whole new set of complications and things that people would have to go through that aren't as mentioned. And maybe it's not necessarily the focus of the book, but it does bring up a lot of questions. Like, maybe people would act more differently than they are being portrayed to act in this book. You shall live as I do. This is the italicized part. Faraday is talking to Rowan and Citra about his kind of rules for their apprenticeship. You shall live as I do, modesty and subsisting on the goodwill of others. You will take no more than you need and waste nothing. People will attempt to buy your friendship. They will lavish things upon you, accept nothing but the barest of human necessities. Faraday had brought Rowan and Citra to his home to begin their new lives. It was a small bungalow in a rundown part of the city that Rowan hadn't even known existed. People playing at poverty, he had told them, because no one was impoverished anymore. Austerity was a choice, for there were always those who shunned the plenty of the post-mortal world. Faraday's home was Spartan, little decoration, unimpressive furniture. Rowan's room had space for only a bed and a small dresser. Citra at least had a window, but the view was of a brick wall. I will not tolerate childish pastimes or vapid communications with friends. Commitment to this life means leaving behind your old life as fully as possible. When a year from now I choose between you, the unchosen one can return to his or her former life easily enough. But for now, consider that life a part of your past. Once they were settled in, he didn't allow them to brood over their circumstances. As soon as Rowan had unpacked his bags, the Scythe announced that they were going to the market. To glean? Rowan asked, more than a little sick at the prospect. No, to get food for the two of you, Faraday told them, unless you prefer to eat my leftovers. Citra smirked at Rowan for asking, as if she hadn't been worrying about that herself. I liked you a lot more before I knew you, he told her. You still don't know me, she answered. Ooh, you go, Citra, you go. Which was true. Then she sighed, and for the first time since their night at the opera, she offered up something more than attitude. We're being forced to live together and forced to compete at something neither of us wants to compete over. I know it's not your fault, but it doesn't exactly put us in a friendly place. I know, Rowan admitted. After all, Citra didn't own all the tension between them. But that still doesn't mean we can't have each other's backs. And she didn't answer him. He didn't expect her to. It was just a seed he wanted to plant. Over the past 2 months, he had learned that no one had his back anymore. Perhaps no one ever did. His friends had pulled away. He was a footnote in his own family. There was only one person now who shared his plight. That was Citra. If they couldn't find a way to trust each other, then what did they have beyond a learner's permit to kill? The title of the chapter. Okay, so that chapter is really good. I liked it because it's obviously the stepping stone into Citra and Rowan's life of becoming an apprentice. I also like that it kind of goes back and forth between the actions that Citra and Rowan go through of like actually learning about him and learning about what he's going to do with them as apprentices to him. But it goes in and it breaks it up with these paragraphs of what he has said out loud to them to let them know kind of what his rules are, how things are going to work, which makes it really interesting. It definitely sets a different kind of pace for that chapter. Okay, we're moving on into another journal entry. There's something else I was going to do, though, first. Wasn't there? Just look up a word or something, or look up something? No, I can't remember. Just thinking about Citra and Rowan, maybe. That's what we were going to do. We were going to look up a fan cast. We're going to do that later, though. I think we'll do it after we finish chapter 1, or part 1, which we are very close to finishing. The greatest achievement. Okay, so I'm moving into the next journal entry. Sorry to make it so abrupt. The greatest achievement of the human race was not conquering death. It was ending government. Back in the days when the world's digital network was called the cloud, people thought giving too much power to an artificial intelligence would be a very bad idea. Cautionary tales abounded in every form of media. The machines were always the enemy. But then the cloud evolved into the thunderhead, sparking with new consciousness, or at least a remarkable facsimile. A facsimile is like a copy. In stark contrast to people's fears, the thunderhead did not seize power. Instead, it was people who came to realize that it was far better suited to run things than politicians. In those days, before the thunderhead, human arrogance, self-interest, and endless infighting determined the rule of law. Inefficient, imperfect, vulnerable to all forms of corruption. But the thunderhead was incorruptible. Not only that, but its algorithms were built on the full sum of human knowledge. All the time and money wasted on political posturing, the lives lost in wars, the populations abused by despots. All gone the moment the thunderhead was handed power. Of course, The politicians, dictators, and warmongers weren't happy, but their voices, which had always seemed so loud and intimidating, were suddenly insignificant. The emperor not only had no clothes, turns out he had no testicles either. This book is a little mature. I realize that now. I mean, I didn't assign this, but it's assigned to students going into 8th grade. It's a little mature. But what she's saying here, there is like an old fable of the emperor with the emperor with no clothes, or the emperor's new clothes. Basically, this guy kind of swindles him and convinces him that he has given him this new outfit that's invisible. And so the emperor is walking around the city, his kingdom, naked, basically to show that a person who seems to be in charge can be easily swayed or easily duped by somebody who with a smarter mind. And I think the author of this journal entry is also making the comparison, not only does he have no clothes, but he doesn't have any like power either. Like he doesn't have any like cojones to try and stand up for himself. I think is what she means. The Thunderhead quite literally knew everything. When and where to build roads, how to eliminate waste in food distribution, and thus end hunger, how to protect the environment from the ever-growing human population. It created jobs. It clothed the poor. It established the world code. Now, for the first time in history, law was no longer the shadow of justice. It was justice. The Thunderhead gave us a perfect world. The utopia that our ancestors would only dream of is our reality. There was only one thing the Thunderhead was not given authority over: the Scythedom. When it was decided that people needed to die in order to ease the tide of population growth, it was also decided that this must be the responsibility of humans. Bridge repair and urban planning could be handled by the Thunderhead, but taking a life was an act of conscience and consciousness. Since it could not be proven that the Thunderhead was either, the Scythedom was born. I do not regret the decision, but I often wonder if the Thunderhead would have done a better job. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Okay, chapter 5. The title of this chapter is kind of a little spooky, right? Kind of gives you not spooky, it's just kind of like funny. But I'm only 96. It's in quotes. Title of this chapter is in quotes. But I'm only 96. While a trip to the market should be an ordinary, everyday occurrence, Citra found that food shopping with a scythe was carried its own basket of crazy. The moment the market doors parted for them and the three of them stepped in, the dread around them was enough to raise goose flesh on Citra's arms. Nothing so blatant as gasps or screams. People were used to scythes passing through their daily lives. It was silent but pervasive. If they had just accidentally strolled onto some theatrical stage and fouled their performance, Citra noticed that, in general, there were 3 types of people. 1. The deniers. These were the people who forged on and pretended the scythe wasn't there. It wasn't just a matter of ignoring him, it was actively, willfully denying his presence. It reminded Citra of the way very small children would play hide and seek, covering their own eyes to hide, thinking that if they couldn't see you, then you couldn't see them. 2. The escape artists. These were the people who ran away but tried to make it look as if they weren't. They suddenly remembered they forgot to get eggs or began chasing after a running child that didn't actually exist. One shopper abandoned a cart mumbling about a wallet he must have left at home, despite an obvious bulge in his back pocket. He hurried out and didn't come back. In his defense, I have been that person who's gone all the way to the store and forgotten their wallet. In his defense. Granted, he is clearly not one of those people, but I've actually done that. 3. The scythe's pets. These were the people who went out of their way to engage the scythe and offer him something with the secret, not so secret hope that he might grant them immunity, or at least glean the person to their right instead of them someday. Here, Your Honor, take my melon. It's bigger. I insist. Did these people know that such sycophantic behavior would make a scythe want to glean them even more? Not that Citra would want to level a death penalty for such a thing, but if she were given a choice between some innocent bystander and someone who was being nauseatingly obsequious, there's that word again, about their produce, she'd choose the melon giver. They're going to probably use these phrases a lot, like sycophantic and obsequious, but it's just to remind you, it does mean to act overly helpful to someone to the point of like bending over backwards just to get them to like you or be pleased with you. There was one shopper who didn't seem to fit the other three profiles, a woman who actually seemed pleased to see him. "Good morning, Scythe Faraday," she said as they passed her near the deli counter. Then she looked at Citra and Rowan, curious. "Your niece and nephew?" "Hardly," he said, with a bit of disdain in his voice, for relatives Citra had no interest in knowing about. "I've taken apprentices." Her eyes widened a bit. "Such a thing," she said in a way that made it unclear whether she thought it was a good or bad idea. "Do they have a penchant for the work?" "Not the slightest." She nodded. "Well then, I guess it's all right. You know what they say, have not a hand in the blade with abandon." Have not a hand in the blade with abandon. I've never heard that saying. There's so many sayings in this book that I've honestly never heard anyone say, and I can't even begin to understand what that one would mean. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon. I guess it's to mean be not reckless with your blade. Be not reckless with violence. Should I look it up? I'm gonna look it up. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon. What does that mean? Can you tell me what it means? Here we go. Oh, it gives you the full thing. Cull from the fold all the brazen and bold for... Oh, it's a... What? Not the same page. Cull from the fold all the brazen and bold for a dog who just might love the bark and the bite is a carrion raven, the craven of old. That's a poetic little bit. I think it's like a limerick. It's a poetic little limerick, but I can't honestly begin to decipher it. I think it's supposed to mean, if I'm reading it correctly, here I'm going to show you what I'm looking at here. I think it's supposed to mean have not a hand in the blade with abandon. I think that's like, obviously, try not to be reckless with violence. Cull from the fold all the brazen and bold. So cull means to kill, right? Or to take away, right? So cull from the fold all the brazen and bold. You're taking all of the people who are brazen and bold, meaning like loud, obnoxious, for a dog who just might love the bark and the bite. Dog who just might love the bark and the bite. So they're loud and violent, maybe, is a carrion raven, the craven of old. The carrion is a carrion raven. I'm pretty sure that's like reference to like a omen, like a bad omen or something. Yeah, maybe. Carrion raven, bad omen of the old, is a bad omen. Okay, so the dog that is both violent and loud is a bad omen for old people. I'm sure there's an interpretation there that makes a little bit more sense than the one that I gave. But yeah, that one that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I'm not gonna lie. Sorry. There you go, guys. Yeah, I've never heard that phrase, and this is coming from his book. Obviously, you see the quote came from the book, but that's the best interpretation that I could have given that. Best interpretation I could have come up with that one. Okay. She says, okay. Have not a hand in the blade with abandon. The Scythe smiled. I hope I can introduce them to you, to your strudel sometime. She nodded at the two of them. Well, that goes without saying. After she had moved on, Scythe Faraday explained that she was a longtime friend. She cooks for me from time to time, and she works in the coroner's office. In my line of work, it's always good to have a friend there. Did you grant her community? Do you grant her immunity? Citra asked. Rowan thought the Scythe might be indignant at the question, but instead he answered, The Scythedom frowns upon those who play favorites, but I found I can grant her immunity on alternate years without raising a red flag. What if another Scythe gleans her during the off years? Then I shall attend her funeral with heartfelt grief, he told them. As they shopped, Citra chose some snacks that the Scythe eyed dubiously. Are these really necessary? He asked. Is anything really necessary? Citra responded. Rowan found it amusing how Citra gave the Scythe attitude, but it worked. He let her keep the chips. Citra is awesome. I think we can all agree that Citra is probably one of the most powerful characters in this book, and she's like just the best. She's sassy. She really sticks to her convictions, which is I think why Scythe Faraday picks her. And she's just like, I don't know. I love her attitude. I wish I could have an ounce of her attitude, to be honest. Rowan tried to be more practical, picking out staples like eggs, flour, and various proteins, and side dishes to go with them. Don't get chickenoid tenders, Citra said, looking at his choices. Trust me, my mother's a food synthesis engineer. That stuff's not actual chicken. They grow it in a petri dish. Rowan held up another bag of frozen protein. How about this? Sea steak? Sure, if you like plankton pressed into meat shapes. Well, then maybe you should pick your own meals instead of grabbing sweets and snacks. Are you always this boring? She asked. Didn't he say we have to live as he lives? I don't think cookie dough ice cream is a part of his lifestyle. It's part of my lifestyle. She sneered at him. That's what I would have said. She sneered at him, but switched out the flavor for vanilla. As they continued to shop, it was Citra who first noticed two suspicious-looking teens who seemed to be tracking them through the store, lingering behind them, trying to look like they were shopping. They were probably unsavories, people who found enjoyment in activities that bordered on the fringe of the law. Sometimes unsavories actually broke the law in minor ways, although most lost interest eventually. But they were always caught by the Thunderhead and reprimanded by peace officers. The most troublesome offenders were tweaked with shock nanites in their blood, just powerful enough to deter any scoffing of the law. And if that didn't work, you got your own personal peace after 24/7. Citra had an uncle like that. You got your own personal peace officer. You got your own personal peace officer 24/7. So basically you're escorted around by somebody. He called his officer his guardian angel and eventually married her. Weird. This book is so weird. There's so many weird things in this book that's like, it's interesting. I think it's very true to how we would view the future as weird because they do things that are weird in the future. I'm sure that people 500 years ago thought that we do weird things now. So yeah. As the three of them waited in the checkout line, one of the unsavories... Oh, wait, I skipped a few chapters. Hang on. He married his peace officer. Her uncle married his peace officer. She tugged on Rowan's sleeve, bringing the unsavories to his attention, but not to Scythe Faraday's. Why do you think they're following us? They probably think there's going to be a gleaning and they want to watch, suggested Rowan, which seemed a likely theory. As it turned out, however, they had other motives. As the three of them waited in the checkout line, one of the unsavories grabbed Scythe Faraday's hand and kissed his ring before he could stop him. The ring began to glow red, indicating his immunity. Ha! Said the unsavory, puffing up in strategic triumph. I've got immunity for a year and you can't undo it. I know the rules. Scythe Faraday was unfazed. Yes, good for you, he said. You have 365 days of immunity. And then looking him in the eye said, and I'll be seeing you on day 366. Suddenly, the teen's smug expression dropped as if all the muscles that held up his face failed. He stuttered a bit and his friend pulled him away. They ran out of the store as fast as they could. Well played, said another man in line. He offered to pay for the Scythe's groceries, which was pointless because Scythes got their groceries for free anyway. Will you really track him down a year from now? Rowan asked. The Scythe grabbed a roll of breath mints from the rack. Not worth my time. Besides, I've already meted out his punishment. He'll be worried about being gleaned all year. A lesson for both of you. A Scythe doesn't have to follow through on a threat for it to be effective. Then a few minutes later, as they were loading the grocery bags into a public car, the Scythe looked across the parking lot. There, he said. You see that woman? The one who just dropped her purse? Yeah, said Rowan. Scythe Faraday pulled out his phone, aimed the camera at the woman, and in an instant, information about her began to scroll on screen. Naturally, 96 years of age, physically 34, mother of 9, data management technician for a small shipping company. She's off to work after she puts away her groceries, the Scythe told them. This afternoon, we will go to her place of business and glean her. Citra drew in an audible breath. Not quite a gasp, but close. Rowan focused on his own breathing so he didn't telegraph his emotions the way Citra had. Why? He asked. Why her? The Scythe gave him a cool look. Why not her? You had a reason for gleaning Cole Whitlock. Who? Citra asked. A kid I knew at school when I first met our honorable Scythe here. Faraday sighed. Fatalities in parking lots make up 1.2% of all accidental deaths during the last days of the age of mortality. Last night, I decided I would choose today's subjects from a parking lot. So all this time while we were shopping, you knew it would end like this, Rowan said. I feel bad for you, Citra said. Even when you're food shopping, death is hiding right behind the milk. It never hides, the Scythe told them, with a world weariness that was hard to describe. Nor does it sleep. You'll learn that soon enough. But it wasn't something either of them were eager to learn. Yeah, no, not very exciting. We're still in this chapter, and we are nearing the end of part 1. This is actually the last chapter of part 1. And I think it's really interesting that you kind of meet these unsavories, right? Because the unsavories do an interesting thing, which is they like kind of skirt the rules, right? Like they try to break the rules when rules aren't really like they're rules, but obviously like the Thunderhead's gonna know if you break a law. And they're just doing things to like try and, mess things up, do things different, which is what they've done in the grocery store, right? Like get immunity without being granted it from the actual Scythe. They've done it unconsentingly or without his consent. And the Scythe is right, though. The Scythe now has given that teenager a worry over death for over a year because he's told the kid, I'm going to come kill you on the day that you finally have your immunity free. Which he says he's not going to do. But the kid is going to think that he is. So it's going to create a whole year of him to worry about how he's going to spend the last year of his life. Which will be interesting, like, I'm sure that it's happened in the past, right? There's no way that they could have, like, people would be punished. I feel like there's probably enough Scythes so that there would be, like, enough punishments for people to go around. He would eventually get gleaned. Eventually. Maybe not. Who knows? I'm just, thinking that's probably what would happen. Okay, coming to the end of part 1. That afternoon, just as the Scythe had said, they went to the shipping company where the woman worked. That's right, they're going to glean this woman they picked out in the parking lot. And they watched, just as Rowan had watched, Cole's gleaning. But today, it was a little more than a mere observation. I have chosen for you a life-terminating pill. Scythe Faraday told the speechless, tremendous woman. He reached into his robe and produced a small pill in a little glass vial. It will not activate until you bite it, so you can choose the moment. You need not swallow it, just bite it. Death will be instantaneous and painless. Her head shook like a bobblehead doll. May I call my children? Scythe Faraday sadly shook his head. No, I'm sorry. We shall pass on any message you have to them. What would it hurt to allow her to say goodbye? Citra asked. He put up his hand to silence her and handed the woman a pen and piece of paper. Say all you need to say in a letter. I promise we shall deliver it. They waited outside her office. Scythe Faraday seemed to have infinite patience. What if she opens a window and decides to splat? Rowan asked. Then her life will end on schedule. It would be a more unpleasant choice, but the ultimate result is the same. The woman didn't choose to splat. Instead, she let them back into the room, politely handed the envelope to Scythe Faraday and sat down at her desk. I'm ready. Then Scythe Faraday did something they didn't expect. He turned to Rowan and handed him the vial. Please place the pill on Mrs. Beaker's mouth. Who? Me? Scythe Faraday didn't answer. He simply held the vial out, waiting for Rowan to take it. Rowan knew he wasn't officially performing the gleaning, but to be an intermediary. The thought was debilitating. He swallowed, tasting bitterness as if it were the pill in his own mouth. He refused to take it. Scythe Faraday gave a moment more, then turned to Citra. You then. Citra just shook her head. Scythe Faraday smiled. Very good, he told them. I was testing you. I would not have been pleased if either of you were eager to administer death. At the word death, the woman took a shuddering breath. Scythe Faraday opened the vial and carefully removed the pill. It was a triangular with dark green coating. Who knew death could arrive so small? But I'm only 96, the woman said, the title of the chapter. We know, the scythe told her. Now, please, open your mouth. Remember, it's not to swallow. You must bite it. She opened her mouth, as she was told, and Scythe Faraday placed the pill on her tongue. She closed her mouth but didn't bite right away. She looked at each of them in turn, Rowan, then Citra, then finally settled her gaze on Scythe Faraday. Then the slightest crunch, and she went limp. Simple as that, but not so simple at all. Citra's eyes were moist. This is not the music that I was hoping it would be. Here we go.
This is Webflow.
Goodness. There we go. There we go. This is the music I want. Citra's eyes were moist. She pressed her lips together. As much as Rowan tried to control his emotions, his breath came out uneasily, and he felt lightheaded. And then Scythe Faraday turned to Citra. Check for a pulse, please. Who, me? The scythe was patient. He didn't ask again. The man never asked a thing twice. Then she continued to hesitate. He finally said, this time, it's not a test. I actually want you to confirm for me that she has no pulse. Citra reached up a hand to the woman's neck. Other side, the scythe told her. She pressed her fingers to the woman's carotid artery, just beneath her ear. No pulse. Satisfied, Scythe Faraday stood. So, that's it? What were you expecting? Said Rowan. A chorus of angels? Citra threw him a half-hearted glare. But I mean, it's so uneventful. Rowan knew what she meant. Rowan had experienced the electric jolt that had taken his schoolmate's life. It was awful, but somehow this was worse. What now? Do we just leave her like this? Best not to linger, Scythe Faraday said, tapping something on his phone. They have phones? They have phones? They have phones. That's crazy. That's crazy. I just realized that. I don't know. I just read that and just realized that. I've notified the coroner to come collect Mrs. Beaker's body. Then he took the letter she had written and slipped it into one of the many pockets of his robe. You two shall present the letter to her family at the funeral. Wait, said Citra. We're going to her funeral? I thought you said it was best not to linger, said Rowan. Lingering and paying respects are two different things. I attend funerals of all the people I glean. Is that a scythe rule? Rowan asked, having never been to a funeral. No, it's my rule, he told them. It's called common decency. Then they left, Rowan and Citra both avoiding eye contact with the dead woman's co-workers. This, both of them realized, was their first initiation rite. This was the moment their apprenticeships had truly began. Oh, so powerful. They experiencing this, their apprenticeships. It's just watched a woman get gleaned. Where did my bookmark go? I don't have a bookmark for this. Okay, well, we're at part 2. That's the end of part 1. I think we've gotten a really good look at this story so far. It's just, the world is so interesting, and now that I'm rereading it, I'm finding that there's a lot more that I'm interested in as well. I think when we start part 2, I will do like some fan casting for the characters that we've already met so far, and try not to spoil anything future. But at least look at the characters that we are reading about right now, like Citra, Scythe Faraday, and Rowan. We might even look at a fan cast for Tiger, which I think would be really fun. Because, you know, he does show up later, even though Citra and Rowan are supposed to be blocked off from their previous lives while they're apprenticing for Scythe Faraday. They do actually get to see their family members and friends, and it is really interesting when they do. So very excited about that. and excited about part 2. This was a good stream, a good run to get through the first part of Scythe by Neal Shusterman. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed my discussion, my ramblings. Maybe it got in the way for you. If it did, just skip over it, you know, whatever. Or leave down in the comments what you think about this book so far. I honestly love it. I'm super excited to get involved into the next chapter. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I'm going to head out. I'm going to get some food. I'm very hungry. And I will be back on Thursday. Let me just make sure. I will be back on Thursday to continue into part 2 of Scythe by Neal Shusterman. I hope you are enjoying this so far, and I will see you then. Bye. See you in class, or see you then. Bye.